This is part 2 of the Verdant Paradox Book 2 in R.M. Stratton's military sci-fi series Concord Horizon. If you like the audiobook, the ebook is available on Amazon at the link in the description. 11. Approach. FTL ended quietly. That was always the strange part. Every simulation wanted drama. Every old film wanted thunder, light, the universe tearing open like someone had offended physics and physics had decided to object. Actual faster-than-light transition aboard Singapore felt like a pressure change in the inner ear, a half-second of deck vibration, and the subtle return of honest stars beyond the forward viewport. Then the universe was there again. Real space. Aelari Prime system. No alarms sounded. No hostile contacts appeared on the main display. No ancient artifact reached across interplanetary distance to introduce itself. The bridge remained dim under emissions control lighting, the crew speaking in low voices as if volume itself could give us away. "Transition complete," Bishop said from the helm. "Drive down. Real space velocity within projected tolerance. We are 3.2 astronomical units from Aelari Prime outer system insertion volume." "Passive profile?" I asked. "Maintained," she said. "No active emissions from us. No standard beacon. No location drone launched." Hernandez sat to my left, already reviewing the transition data. Shipwide status screen within expected limits. Engineering reports FTL shutdown clean. On my right, Bassie leaned over the science station, her face lit by layers of passive sensor returns. "We are receiving ambient stellar radiation and outer system magnetic scattering," she said. "Building picture now. Resolution poor but improving." "Take your time," I said. That was a lie, technically. I wanted answers immediately. Every captain did. But wanting the universe to resolve faster did not make the sensors better, and saying so would only have made the bridge feel more impatient. Bishop eased Singapore along the first leg of the passive approach track. We moved under minimal drive, using the system's outer bodies as cover, letting Aelari Prime's distant sun do most of the talking. Bassie's plan depended on patience, geometry, and the assumption that Thrihiel believed any coalition ship coming for him would arrive loudly enough to be noticed. It was a reasonable assumption, which was why we were not doing that. The system unfolded slowly across the displays. Aelari Prime's star was warmer than Sol, slightly larger, bright enough that the inner system carried wide habitable margins. 2 small rocky worlds inside the orbit of Aelari Prime. 1 outer belt. 3 gas giants beyond us. Their magnetospheres broad enough to hide a careful ship if that ship was willing to move like a thief. We were willing. Aelari Prime itself appeared first as a marker, then a blue-green disk in the passive reconstruction. It had 1 large moon, pale and heavily cratered, locked in a broad orbit that gave it a long, stately track around the planet. The Aelari would see it as a god's lamp. We saw it as terrain. "Outer system remains quiet," Bassie said. "No active search patterns detected. No broad comm traffic. No standard transponder signatures." "That does not mean empty," Hernandez said. "No, Commander, it means disciplined or dead." Kimov stood near the aft bulkhead with his arms folded. "I prefer disciplined. Dead things become surprises." Russo, posted by the bridge entrance, muttered, "That's inspirational, Lieutenant." Kimov did not look back. "It was not meant to inspire." Bishop's hands moved lightly over the helm controls. She had the joystick active instead of full touch interface mode. 1 hand resting on the stick and the other near the throttle quadrant. She could fly through glass displays as well as anyone, but Bishop trusted physical controls when precision mattered. I had never argued with her about it. Some habits survived because they were correct. "Coming up on first moon shadow geometry in 40 minutes, she said. If there's anything hiding around the far side, Bassie should start seeing its thermal leakage when we cross the scattering angle. Assuming it leaks, Bassie said. Everything leaks, Bishop said. The universe is rude that way. Varos's voice came over the engineering channel. That statement is technically acceptable. Bishop grinned without looking away from the helm. High praise. Do not become dependent upon it. The bridge relaxed by 1/2 degree. I let it happen. Small ships needed those little pressure releases. 45 people sealed together at FTL for days did not remain functional because discipline replaced personality. They remained functional because discipline gave personality a safe place to breathe. Bassie, I said. Any sign of Kestrel? Not yet. We are still outside reliable orbital resolution. I have its expected track, but no confirmed return. Keep it passive. Aye, Captain. Hernandez looked from her console to me. We are still within the window for launching the location update drone. I know. We wait? We wait. Her expression did not change, but I knew the calculation behind it. Every hour we delayed launching our own courier back toward Houston delayed any chance of receiving a tailored reply. It also delayed giving any enemy in-system a fresh trail to our position. The decision was not difficult. That did not make it comfortable. Captain, Bassie said. There was a shift in her voice that brought every eye on the bridge toward science. What do you have? Thermal irregularity near Aelari Prime's moon, far side hemisphere, trailing quadrant. Bishop stilled slightly. Artificial? Too early to confirm. The main display adjusted. Aelari Prime's moon enlarged, rotating into a false color reconstruction based on passive thermal scattering. The near side showed expected gradients, sunlit rock, shadowed basins, crater rims holding residual heat. The far side was less clear, stitched together from indirect returns and reflected radiation. One small point glowed wrong, not bright, not obvious, not even visible unless the software knew how to subtract geology from machinery, but it was there. Can you refine? I asked. Working, Bassie said. Bishop adjusted our vector without being told, keeping us behind the outer system shadow line, while giving the science station a slightly better angle. The ship responded like an animal trained to breathe softly. The point sharpened. Bassie brought up a second overlay. Thermal output is intermittent. Whoever it is, they are cycling systems down aggressively. Drive signature? Hernandez asked. Minimal, residual only. Size? Small freighter range, Bassie said. Larger than a shuttle, smaller than a frigate. Hull geometry irregular. I need more resolution. Varos, I said. Engineering, he answered. We may have a ship hiding on the far side of the moon. Passive return coming to you. I have it. There was silence on the engineering channel for several seconds. Long enough that I pictured Varos down on Deck 3, standing under the double-height engineering bay's overheads, broad shoulders hunched toward a display while his people watched him think. That is not Kehlar, he said at last. Bishop glanced over her shoulder. Not Kehlar? No. The drive cowling is wrong. The aft thermal pattern is Lenian. That pulled the bridge tight. Lenian military? Hernandez asked. No, Varos said. Cargo handler. I leaned forward. Explain. The hull configuration is old, a lower hearth commercial pattern, though not exclusively lower hearth now. Industrial cargo transfer vessel. Designed for station-to-orbit freight, mining support, container movement, and short-haul interplanetary logistics. How old? I asked. The design is approximately 100 years old. Bishop blinked. He's flying a century-old freighter. The model is 100 years old, Varos corrected. It is still in production. Of course it is, Bishop said. "It is reliable," Veros said in the tone of a man stating an obvious moral truth. "Simple frame, generous maintenance tolerances, modular drive components, overbuilt cargo grapples, minimal elegance, excellent endurance." "That may be the most Lennian sales pitch I've ever heard," Bishop said. "It was not a sales pitch. It was a correct assessment." I looked at the display again. Thrihiel's last ship, the Fang, had been purpose-built violence. Kehlar fast-attack hull, armored, aggressive, armed beyond its size, and flown by a crew that knew exactly how to use it. Bishop had put it into Eden's surface, but not before it had turned the settlement into a disaster zone and almost cost us Joseph. This was something else. Not tooth and claw. A workhorse. "Hernandez," I said. "I see it," she said. "If that is Thrihiel's ship, his resource base has changed." "Downgraded," Bishop said. Varos came back over the channel. "Not necessarily downgraded in reliability. Downgraded in combat role, certainly." "That's what I meant," Bishop said. "He is no longer operating with a dedicated Kehlar strike vessel," Hernandez said. "No Fong, no obvious warship, a second-hand cargo handler, possibly purchased through intermediaries or stolen." "Can it carry a ground team?" I asked. "Yes," Veros said, "if modified. Standard crew 12. Cargo volume sufficient for 30 personnel under uncomfortable conditions, more if the operator has no concern for comfort." "Thrihiel strikes me as flexible on comfort," Bishop said. "Armament?" Hernandez asked. "Factory model carries none beyond debris defense lasers and docking tools. But the frame can accept modular weapons if the owner lacks respect for certification standards." "Which he does," I said. "Almost certainly." Bassi layered the thermal image with the moon's topography. "It is tucked into a far-side crater wall, low power. Nose angled away from planetary line of sight. They are using the moon to block visual and primitive astronomical observation from Aelari Prime." "That would work against the Aelari," Hernandez said. "Yes," Bassi said. "A Bronze Age civilization would have no way to detect it unless it crossed the visible disk or produced atmospheric effects." Bishop's grin returned, sharp and quiet. "So Thrihiel hides his ship on the far side of the moon." She shook her head. "Somebody should have made him watch more human science fiction." I looked at her. "You want to expand on that?" "It's practically a trope, sir. Secret alien base, far side of the moon, hidden fleet, far side of the moon, ancient probe, far side of the moon, sinister government facility, definitely far side of the moon." She pointed at the display. "Against the Aelari, sure, brilliant. Against a spacefaring civilization, that's the first place we look." Kimov said. Perhaps he did not expect us to arrive quietly enough to look before he moved. "That," Bishop said, "is a more professional version of my point." Veros's voice returned. "Human fiction contains a statistically unusual number of moon-based concealment scenarios." Bishop turned toward the engineering pickup. "You've been cataloging?" Dr. Himura provided a viewing list after Eden. I kept my face carefully neutral. "Dr. Himura gave you human science fiction homework." She described it as cultural familiarization. Bishop looked delighted. "What did you watch?" "This is not relevant to current operations." "That means something embarrassing." "It does not." Varos. A pause. The one with the apes was confusing. Russo lost the fight and laughed out loud. Even Hernandez's mouth twitched. "Back to the hidden ship," I said, before the bridge dissolved completely. Bishop, still smiling, returned fully to her board. "Aye, Captain. Hidden ship. Far side of moon. Very original." I studied the display. The humor helped. It did not change the fact that we had found him. or at least found the ship he was using now. "Can they see us?" I asked. Bassi answered first. "Not unless they are running a passive net much better than their emissions suggest. Our current vector keeps the outer gas giant between us and their likely sensor line for another 26 minutes. After that, they could see us if they are looking in the correct direction at the correct time with sufficiently sensitive passive equipment." "Varos," I said. "Could that cargo handler carry sensors good enough?" "Factory standard, no. Modified, perhaps. But power limits under their current silent posture would reduce effectiveness. If they are hiding, they are also blinding themselves." "Good." "Conditionally," Hernandez said. "Always." I turned to Bishop. "Can you keep us masked longer?" "Yes," she said immediately. Then, because she was good, she added, "But not on the original approach schedule. I can use the moon's limb and the planet's upper magnetosphere to keep us in cold angles. But it adds time and puts us out of position for a fast Kestrel intercept." "How much time?" 4 hours minimum. 6 if Bassi wants a clean picture before we commit." Bassi looked up. "I want a clean picture before we commit." "See?" Bishop said. "Science is greedy." "Science is cautious," Bassi said. "Same uniform, different shoes." I looked to Hernandez. "If we break for Kestrel now," she said, "we risk revealing ourselves before we know whether the cargo handler is crewed, armed, or supporting a ground operation. If we stay masked, we may lose time for any survivors aboard Kestrel." There it was again, the shape of command. 2 bad options pretending to be a choice. "Bassi," I said, "any indication Kestrel is venting atmosphere or tumbling?" "Not yet. I do not have reliable resolution, but no large debris field and no major thermal bloom in expected orbit. So no immediate sign the station is dying." "No, Captain." "Kimov." He straightened slightly. "Captain, assume the cargo handler launched a ground team. What does hiding behind the moon tell you?" "That the ship is not intended to dominate orbit," he said. "It is preserving itself, either because it cannot fight us, or because the ground mission is more important than the ship." "Could be bait. Everything can be bait. Helpful." "You ask Marines questions, Captain. You receive Marine answers." "Fair." I looked back to the moon. Thrihiel had lost the Fang at Eden. If this was his current ship, then his circumstances had changed. The Whisper Network relationship was supposedly burned. His Kehlar military backing was at least deniable and probably partial. He still had followers, still had money or favors or leverage enough to acquire a Lenian cargo handler and a crew willing to follow him into a non-interference violation over a Bronze Age world. But not enough to arrive in a strike vessel. That mattered. A cornered opponent with fewer resources was not necessarily weaker. Sometimes he was more dangerous because every remaining asset mattered enough to spend carefully. "Captain," Bassi said, "I am refining the silhouette." The display sharpened another degree. The ship hiding against the crater wall resolved into an ungainly shape. Blunt forward hull, broad cargo spine, 4 oversized maneuvering pods, and an aft engine assembly that looked too large for the rest of the frame. Industrial, practical, ugly in the way reliable equipment often was. Varos made a sound over the comm that might, in another species, have been nostalgia. "Confirmed," he said. "Lenian cargo handler. Hearthline K-47 pattern or licensed derivative. The aft port maneuvering pod has been replaced with a non-standard unit. Lower thermal efficiency. Likely salvage." "You can tell that from this?" Bishop asked. "Yes. You are terrifying." "No, I am qualified." I tapped the armrest. "Can you identify ownership?" "Not from passive return. Registry marks would be external, and if Thrihiel has any sense, removed or falsified. Does he? Yes, Varos said. Unfortunately. Bassi highlighted the crater. No active launch from the cargo handler, no visible shuttle track. If a ground element descended, it did so before our arrival. Any lander? Not detected. Could be on the surface, Hernandez said. Or hidden in terrain, Bassi added. Aelari Prime's jungle canopy is dense enough to mask small craft from passive orbital reconstruction. Of course it was. I looked at the main display. Aelari Prime turned below its moon, green and blue and unaware. Somewhere on that world, Thrihiel might already be moving through a civilization whose gods had faces he could exploit. Somewhere in orbit, Kestrel waited with 6 people who might still be alive. Somewhere in the dark behind a moon, a second-hand Lenian cargo handler sat powered down like a thief holding his breath. We'd found a piece of the board. Not the game. Do we launch the location update drone? Hernandez asked quietly. The bridge waited. If we launched, Houston would know where we were. Any stealth courier or delayed dispatch sent toward Aelari Prime would have a better chance of finding us. If someone else was watching, they might also know we were here. If we waited, we stayed invisible and uninformed. I hated the choice, which usually meant it was real. Not yet, I said. Hernandez nodded once. No argument. Bishop, keep us masked. Bassi, build me the cleanest picture you can of that cargo handler, Kestrel's orbit, and any probable descent vectors to the surface. Varos, I want everything you know about Hearthline K-47 cargo handlers, capabilities, weak points, hiding places, modifications, the way desperate people abuse them. I will prepare a file, Varos said. The abuse section may be extensive. Kimov, begin planning for 3 branches, Kestrel boarding, cargo handler boarding, and surface descent. Kimov's eyes sharpened. Rules of engagement? Defensive unless fired upon. Capture if possible. We need information. We also need our people alive. I know. He nodded once. Then I will plan for both. Hernandez, I said. Situation room in 30 minutes. Senior staff. Aye, Captain. I settled back into the chair and watched the moon turn. Bishop's joke still hung somewhere in the bridge air, not because it was funny, though it had been, but because it was human. Far side of the moon, hidden ship, old trope, the universe giving us something familiar at the edge of something unknown. Against the Aelari, the trick would have worked forever. Against us, it had lasted 40 minutes. But Thrihiel knew enough about us to know we would eventually look there, which meant either he had made a mistake, or he wanted us to see the ship. I looked at the faint thermal mark against the crater wall and decided, not for the first time, that I preferred opponents who were stupid. The universe, as usual, had declined to provide one. 12. Kestrel Dock. The stealth courier found us 20 minutes before the moon gave us our window. That was how these things usually worked. The universe waited until a captain had almost convinced himself that the number of unknowns on the board had become manageable, then politely slid another one across the table. Bassi saw it first. Captain, she said from science, voice low but sharpened at the edges. Passive contact, small object, high velocity, dark profile, bearing relative 187 by 4. It is not broadcasting. Bishop's hand settled over the helm controls. Weapon? Too small for a strike package, Bassi said. Too deliberate for debris. Hernandez was already pulling the bridge tactical overlay across her console. Trajectory? Direct intercept with our projected shadow corridor. That brought the bridge quiet. I looked at the display. The object was barely there, a mathematical suggestion moving through the system with an arrogance only something very small and very fast could afford. No broad transponder. No navigational handshake. No friendly ping announcing itself to every receiver within a few light seconds. A message bottle running silent. Courier drone, Hernandez said. Stealth profile, Bassi added. Coalition design, but it is not using the standard relay handshake. Could be spoofed, Kimov said from the aft bulkhead. Everything can be spoofed, Bishop said. This one's doing it very politely. I tapped the armrest. Challenge it through Warden channel. Tight beam. Minimum power. Bishop sent the challenge. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the object answered. The bridge display updated with a single authentication string, heavy with encryption, and wrapped in enough classification tags to make a staff officer sweat. Coalition Naval Intelligence, Concord Warden Channel, Eyes Only, HCS Singapore Command Authority. Below that, 3 origin identifiers appeared. Fevai, Houston Cipher Project. Admiral Stephen Archuleta, Coalition Navy Houston. Rolkson, Concord Warden Observer. Joseph's name did not appear in the header. It did not need to. I felt it anyway. Bring it in, I said. Bishop glanced over her shoulder. Docking a stealth courier under emissions control while we're hiding from a century-old Lenian cargo hauler on the far side of a moon. Standard Tuesday. Wednesday ship time, Hernandez said. That makes it worse. Helm, I said. Aye, Captain. Bishop adjusted our attitude by fractions. Singapore did not reach for the drone. Reaching would have required energy, and energy was visibility. Instead, she altered our track just enough that the drone's path intersected the retrieval envelope on its own. Deck 4's external collection port opened for less than 7 seconds. A magnetic cradle caught the courier, killed its residual spin, and pulled it into the shielded transfer chamber. Varos's voice came over the comm from engineering. Courier secured. No tracking beacon detected. Outer casing contains 2 passive thermal baffles, 1 self-scuttle charge, and a tamper mesh. Friendly and paranoid, Bishop said. Correct, Varos said. Can we read it? I asked. Already routing the packet to the bridge in your ready room, Hernandez said. The classified file opened across my command display. I read the executive summary first. Then I read it again, because the first time through my mind refused to accept how much worse the situation had become in fewer than 6 sentences. Fevai and Joseph had unlocked the cipher's larger structure. Not a document, not a single artifact record. A map, 11 nodes. Eden was one. Aelari Prime was another. The Aelari Prime coordinate matched Kestrel's geological anomaly files, the same files Thrihiel had raided the observation post to acquire. Houston could not send the packet directly to us while we were in FTL, because our exact position had been unknown until dropout. So they had launched a stealth courier directly to Aelari Prime, carrying the map under Warden Channel priority, and trusting it to find us once we arrived. I sat still for several seconds. The bridge remained quiet. They could read my face well enough to know this was not a routine intelligence update. Hernandez leaned slightly toward me. Captain? I transferred the summary to her station, then to Bassi and Varos under compartmented access. Houston confirmed the cipher is a map, I said. 11 precursor nodes. Eden is 1. Aelari Prime is 1. Bishop did not turn from the helm, but her shoulders tightened. Bassi's eyes flicked rapidly across her display. Aelari Prime coordinate? Match to Kestrel anomaly data. The central highland structure, she said quietly. Probably. Hernandez finished reading. Then Thrihiel did not simply guess. No, he had enough of the pattern to know there was something here, or enough of the stolen data to confirm it once he arrived. Kimov's expression did not change, but his voice lowered. And the cargo handler is not the objective. No, I said. The planet is. The map appeared on the central tactical display at my command. 11 points. 2 highlighted. Eden and Aelari Prime burned in white against the dark frame of known space. The other 9 waited beyond them. 9 more problems that had not existed for us 10 minutes ago. Or rather, they had existed. We simply had not known where to look. I thought of Joseph in the Houston lab, 14 years old, hands folded at a console, seeing the universe arrange itself into a shape the rest of us had missed. I thought of Fevai, precise and careful, sending us truth wrapped in enough encryption to survive the dark. "Captain," Bishop said, "moonline window in 18 minutes. The timing reasserted itself with the bluntness of reality. Thrihiel's cargo handler remained hidden against the far side crater wall. The moon's rotation and orbital geometry were about to deny that ship direct line of sight to Kestrel's orbital track for just under 31 minutes. Not long. Long enough if Bishop flew the approach clean and Kestrel's docking collar still worked. The stealth courier had not changed the immediate plan. It had only made the reason for the plan heavier. "We proceed," I said. Hernandez nodded once. "Boarding team. Me, you, Kimov, Chen, Russo." Kimov's eyes lifted slightly at Russo's name. "He can be quiet," I said. From the bridge entrance, Russo said, "Sir, I'm wounded." "You're not even in the room officially." "Emotionally wounded, sir." Chen, standing beside him, said nothing. His expression suggested he had heard worse from Russo and expected to hear worse again. "Nara stays aboard until we know the medical situation," I said. "If survivors are mobile, we bring them to Singapore. If they are not, she crosses with a med team after we secure the station." Hernandez entered the orders. "And the drone?" "Keep it shielded. No outgoing acknowledgement to Houston yet." She looked at me. "If we transmit now," I said, "we risk lighting ourselves up before docking. Houston knows the drone launched. They will not know we received it until we tell them, and we are not telling anyone anything until Kestrel is secure." "Aye, Captain." Bishop's hands moved. Singapore began to fall toward Kestrel without appearing to fall at all. That was the art of it. Any ship could burn hard and announce its confidence. Bishop flew like a thought someone else had not quite had yet. She used the moon, Aelari Prime's magnetosphere, Kestrel's own orbital shadow, and the broad ignorance of a hidden cargo handler, whose crew had chosen concealment at the cost of visibility. We crossed the line where Thrihiel's ship could not see us unless it moved, and if it moved, Bassie would see that. For the next 26 minutes, the bridge spoke in numbers. Range, closure, thermal bleed, docking collar orientation, Kestrel rotation, atmospheric status, passive confirmation, no active ping, no beacon, no friendly hello. The observation post emerged in the forward display as a dark shape against the green glow of Aelari Prime. Kestrel looked wrong. Stations had posture, even small ones. A functioning orbital platform held itself with the subtle confidence of systems working together. Attitude control steady. Lights where lights should be. Heat signature evenly distributed. Maintenance drones making their small exterior adjustments. Kestrel had none of that. Its attitude was stable but sluggish. Its outer ring showed 2 dark sections where power had been cut. The communications mast was intact but cold. One docking arm bore scoring near the collar where Thrihiel's boarding craft had forced the seal. It was not dead. It looked held down. "Atmosphere?" I asked. Bassie checked the passive readings. "Compromised but present. Internal pressure uneven. Life support cycling at emergency levels. Life signs? Intermittent. The hull is interfering and I cannot sweep actively." "How many?" She hated the answer before giving it. "At least 4, possibly more. I cannot confirm 6. The number sat in the bridge. "Docking collar?" Hernandez asked. Bishop answered. "Damaged but aligned. Androgynous interface should take if the latches aren't warped." Varos came over the channel. "Singapore's port-side docking assembly is ready. I have extended the adaptive collar." Our androgynous docking system sat on the port side of the ship, aft of the bridge. It was one of those pieces of Concord standard engineering everyone praised, until they had to maintain it. In theory, any compliant vessel or station could dock with any other compliant vessel or station, regardless of which side had originally been designed as active or passive. The hatches met, read each other's geometry, extended adjustable seals, equalized pressure, and created a temporary corridor between hulls. In practice, every species had a different definition of standard, and every damaged station had its own opinion about whether geometry still applied. "Bring us in," I said. Bishop did. The bridge fell silent except for her voice and Varos's. 10 meters. Collar extension holding. 8. Kestrel hatch ring is warped by 3 degrees. Correcting. 6. Do not correct further. Let Singapore's collar adapt. I know, Varos. 4. I said I know. 3. The deck gave a faint tremor as the docking collars touched. Not impact, contact. Soft capture, Bishop said. Varos answered immediately. Adaptive seal extending, Kestrel ring resisting at lower port quadrant. Can you force it? I asked. I can persuade it. A low mechanical vibration traveled through the hull. Persuasion in progress, Varos said. Bishop murmured. That sounds illegal. Hard capture, Varos said. Seal integrity at 91%. Pressure equalization available. Hatch interface mated. Good work, I said. Adequate work performed under unreasonable time constraints. Still good. A pause. Accepted. I stood. Hernandez with me. Kemov, bring Chen and Russo. Bishop, you have the ship. Aye, Captain, Bishop said. If the cargo handler moves. I hide harder or shoot first, depending on how rude they are. Try hiding first. I will make an effort. Hernandez and I left the bridge through the aft passage into the situation room. The room had been converted from briefing posture to boarding control. The central table displayed Kestrel's internal layout in partial resolution, most of it built from pre-raid schematics and whatever passive thermal data Bassi could extract without betraying us. The port-side docking hatch stood at the far end, inner door sealed, status lights amber while the pressure equalized. Nara was already there with a medical kit over one shoulder. I know, she said before I spoke. I stay aboard until you clear the station. That was my line. You were taking too long. Her expression was professional. Her eyes were not. We have at least 4 life signs, I said. Maybe 6. Then move quickly. I plan to. Plans are good. Survivors are better. Kemov arrived with Chen and Russo in green marine shipboard gear, helmets sealed back but ready, rifles held low. They looked larger in the situation room than they did on Deck 4. Marines had that effect in enclosed spaces. Russo glanced at the hatch. This is gonna smell bad, isn't it? Kemov looked at him. Russo nodded. Quietly smelling bad, understood. Chen checked the charge level on his rifle without comment. Hernandez handed me a compact sidearm. I took it, checked it, and holstered it at my thigh. I did not like boarding friendly installations with weapons drawn. I liked the alternative less. The hatch light shifted from amber to green. Varos's voice came over the local comm. Pressure equalized. Seal is stable. Do not strike the lower port quadrant of the interface unless you wish to create a problem. Noted, I said. Kemov moved first. He keyed the inner hatch. The door opened. The short docking passage beyond was lit by Singapore's clean white boarding lights. At the far end, Kestrel's hatch waited in emergency red. For 1 second, the two ships touched without anyone crossing. Prototype frigate and wounded observation post. Warship and research platform. The ship that had come because the station had survived long enough to call. Then Kemov crossed. Chen followed. Russo after him. Hernandez and I went next. The moment I stepped through Kestrel's hatch, the smell hit me. Ozone, stale air, burned insulation, human sweat, medical sealant. The faint sour note of life support that had been recycling too long through filters not designed to carry a station after a hostile boarding. Kestrel's corridor was narrow, functional, and damaged in ways that felt intimate. A scorch mark along the left bulkhead, where a cutting charge had opened an access panel. A smear of dried blood near a handhold. A dropped cafeteria cup floating against a vent grill until the weak circulation pulled it down and let it tumble along the deck. Emergency lights pulsed red at long intervals, turning everyone's faces briefly strange. Singapore was 4 months old and built for hard choices. Kestrel had been built for patience. Seeing patients wounded did something to the inside of me. "Clear left," Chen said. "Clear right," Russo said, quieter than usual. Kemov moved ahead in the low, efficient posture of a man who trusted corners only after they had disappointed him by failing to produce enemies. We followed the route Bassi had marked to the nearest secure compartment. The first hatch was locked from the outside. Hernandez knelt by the panel. Manual override disabled. "Varos," I said over comm. "Can you give us access?" "Working through the interface now. Kestrel's internal network is fragmented. I can open local systems if they still accept authority." A beat. The hatch clicked. "Useful," I said. "I know." Kemov opened it. Inside were 2 people. A man in a technician's jumpsuit sat against the far wall, one arm wrapped tightly against his ribs. A woman lay on her side under an emergency blanket, breathing shallowly. Both blinked against our helmet lights like people who had been waiting so long that rescue had become another thing not to trust. "Coalition Navy," I said. "HCS Singapore, you're safe." The man stared at me. Then his face broke, not crying exactly, something before crying. The collapse of the muscle required to keep fear organized. Hernandez moved to the woman. "Alive, feverish, possible infection." "Nara," I said. "Standing by," she answered from the docking hatch. "We have 2 survivors, 1 urgent medical." "Send location." Hernandez transmitted the marker. Kemov left Russo with the compartment and pushed forward with Chen. I followed. Second secure space, empty. Third, jammed. Kemov did not ask permission. He gestured Chen to one side, placed a compact breaching tool against the manual latch, and fired a controlled pulse that made the hatch complain without exploding. He pulled it open by hand. 3 people inside. Dr. David Liu, station director, with a bandage around his left forearm and exhaustion carved into every line of his face. Dr. Mara Solis, blood dried at her temple, one eye swollen. Leon Okafor, systems engineer, dehydrated and shaking but upright. Liu saw my uniform first, then my rank, then my face. "Captain Hansen," he said. "That surprised me enough that I lost half a second. You know me? Everyone in Observation Command knows the Warden Captain after Eden." There were things I wanted to say to that. None of them mattered. "How many?" I asked. 6 in command staff," Liu said immediately. "All alive as of 2 hours ago. Marsh and Khalil are in secondary briefing. Patel was with us until yesterday. We moved him to maintenance shelter 2 when his breathing worsened." He paused, breath catching. "There were 2 technicians on lower deck when the raid started. We lost contact during the boarding. I do not know their status. We have them, I said. First compartment off the docking corridor. Both alive. One urgent medical. Lou closed his eyes for a moment, said something in Mandarin too quiet to catch. Opened his eyes again. 8. For the first time since we had entered the system, something in my chest unclenched. Medical is crossing now, I said. We'll get you out. Lou nodded once, controlled and formal until the effort cost too much. He closed his eyes and leaned back against the bulkhead. Coalition training took over. That was one of the things civilization did well when it worked. It built habits strong enough to carry people through the first minutes after fear. Hernandez began assigning evacuation order. Kimov marked cleared corridors. Chen pushed ahead toward Maintenance Shelter 2. Russo, now entirely serious, helped the injured technician from the first compartment toward the docking passage. Nara crossed with 2 medical crew and turned Kestrel's corridor into a triage lane with the speed of someone who had done harder medicine in worse places. I found Marsh in secondary briefing. The hatch opened on dim light and colder air. She was sitting against the wall with Dr. Yusuf Khalil beside her. Khalil had one hand pressed to a pressure bandage at his side. Marsh's right shoulder was wrapped in a field dressing that had been applied competently but too long ago. Her face was pale, her eyes too bright. She looked up when I entered. For a second she did not see me. She saw the uniform, the captain's bars, the warden insignia. Then she saw me. "Captain Hansen," she said. "You're Dr. Marsh." "Yes." Her voice was rough but steady. "You came faster than I estimated." "I had a good pilot. That helps." I crouched in front of her. "Dr. Himura is aboard. We're going to move you to Singapore." Marsh's gaze sharpened at Nara's name. "Medical officer from Eden." "Yes. Good. She will understand the food compatibility notes." That was not the first thing I expected a wounded xenobiologist to say after days locked in a damaged station. It was, however, probably the first thing this wounded xenobiologist needed to say. "We'll recover your files," I said. Her left hand tightened against the deck. "They tried to erase them." "I know." "No," she said, "not all of them. They copied central archives, deleted specific threads, geological surveys, cultural overlays, religious anthropology, biochemical site comparisons, anything that pointed to the mountain structure." She swallowed, and the effort hurt her. "But they did not know about my segregated cache." I looked at Hernandez, who had entered behind me. Marsh saw the exchange and forced herself straighter. "I have what they were trying to erase," she said. "It is on a cache they did not find." For a moment, the damaged station seemed to hold its breath around us. Outside Kestrel's hull, Aelari Prime turned beneath green clouds. Behind its moon, Thrihiel's stolen ship waited in the dark. In Houston, Joseph and Fevai had found a map, and here, in a wounded observation post that had refused to die, Helen Marsh had saved the road to the place where the next piece waited. 13. Debriefing. Debriefing survivors is not interrogation. That was the first thing every officer learned, and the first thing tired officers forgot if they were not careful. Interrogation is about extracting what someone does not want to give you. Debriefing is about helping someone organize what fear, pain, and adrenaline have scattered across the floor of their mind. Push too hard, and you break the thing you came to recover. Go too gently, and the information arrives too late to matter. The trick is knowing when a person is evidence and when a person is simply hurt. Usually they are both. For the next 12 hours, Kestrel became 2 ships at once. On one side of the docking collar, Singapore remained dark, sealed and quiet, her hull pressed against the wounded observation post, while Bishop held our orbital posture inside the moon shadow window, and Bassi watched Thrihiel's hidden cargo handler breathe behind the far side of the moon. On the other side, Kestrel slowly returned to being a place where human beings could survive. Nara took the station's small infirmary within 5 minutes of crossing. She did not ask permission. Doctors rarely do when permission has become an obstacle to medicine. She set Patel on the primary cot, Khalil on the secondary, and turned one wall of the infirmary into a working triage board. Rousseau hauled portable oxygen cylinders through the corridor with the grim dignity of a man who had learned that jokes were for before and after, not during. Chen assisted without speaking. Kemov kept the corridor secure and somehow made every survivor feel that the danger had moved away from them, rather than merely changed rooms. Lou had a fractured radius and dehydration. Solas had a concussion, 3 cracked ribs, and the expression of someone who had decided she would not fall apart until her report was finished. Okafor had burns across both palms from trying to restore station power after Thrihiel's people had cut the main distribution trunk. Patel had aspirated smoke during the first hour after the raid and spent 2 days breathing station air that the filters could no longer properly scrub. Khalil had a deep puncture wound to the side, where a piece of internal paneling had torn loose during the initial breach. Marsh had an infected shoulder wound, 2 days of fever, and a mind that still sorted the world into usable categories. Nara did not like that last part. Her temperature is high, she told me quietly outside the infirmary after the first pass. She is coherent because she is disciplined, not because she is stable. How long can I talk to her? 10 minutes at a time. I need more than 10 minutes. I know. She looked through the infirmary hatch at Marsh, who was sitting upright, despite the medical monitor's opinion on the subject. Then ask better questions, Nara said. That was marriage, or whatever name the coalition had not yet formally given what we were to each other. She did not soften the truth just because I was the one who needed it. So I asked better questions. We began in Kestrel's secondary briefing room because it had power, a table, and a door. Hernandez sat to my right. Bassie stood beside the wall display with Marsh's recovered cache open under isolated security. Lou sat at the far end with his injured arm braced against his chest. Salas joined for the cultural sections, against Nara's recommendation, and with the expression of someone who had heard Nara's recommendation and filed it under irrelevant to duty. Marsh sat across from me with a thermal blanket around her shoulders and a cup of electrolyte solution in both hands. Her hands shook. Her voice did not. They were disciplined, Marsh said. That is the first thing you need to understand. We saw that in the damage pattern, Hernandez said. No, not just disciplined tactically, disciplined morally, or at least procedurally. Marsh paused, dissatisfied with her own phrasing. They did not kill unless they had a reason. They had reasons available. They chose not to use most of them. That sounds like Thrihiel, I said. She looked at me. You know him. I know enough to dislike how well I know him. Lou leaned forward slightly. He came aboard personally. Not at first. The first team secured the post. He entered after they controlled the corridors. Did he speak to you? I asked. Briefly, Lou said. He asked where the isolated research archives were kept. I refused. He told me refusal was expected and inefficient. That also sounds like him. Solas's mouth tightened. Then one of his people found the central index anyway. They had partial system credentials, Okafor had told us earlier, from a medical cot with both hands wrapped. Not Kestrel credentials, coalition architecture. Someone gave them or sold them enough to know where to start. That part had gone into a separate file. Thrihiel with stolen credentials was bad. Thrihiel with access to people who could get stolen coalition architecture was worse. Marsh took another sip from the cup. They wanted 3 classes of data: geological surveys, religious anthropology, biological site comparisons. Bassie brought up the cache index. Specific threads. Central Highlands, Marsh said. The mountain range here. She nodded toward the display. Bassie highlighted the region. Aelari Prime appeared in orbital reconstruction, green and cloud-wrapped, with the central continent enlarged. A spine of mountains ran through the jungle like a buried blade. There are several temple complexes in that range, Marsh continued. Most are Aelari construction. Stone, terraces, water channels, astronomical sightlines, ritual gardens, Bronze Age engineering, though very good Bronze Age engineering. And one is not, I said. Marsh looked at me. That was the moment when the stealth courier from Houston stopped being a packet I had read and became a fact standing in the room. No, she said. One is not. Bassie pulled up the relevant file. The image was rough, reconstructed from Kestrel's passive orbital passes and Marsh's field notes. Jungle canopy, pale stone, a terraced complex built into a mountain bowl, half swallowed by green. At first glance, it looked like any other ancient sacred site from a dozen human histories. Steps, walls, courtyards, roof lines, water basins, ritual alignments. Then Bassie stripped away the Aelari construction layer. Something larger remained beneath it, not a building in the human sense, not a temple, a curved structure embedded in the mountain itself, partially exposed by erosion, its surface mineralogy wrong for the region, and its geometry too clean to be geology. The room went still. We called it the precursor stone, Marsh said. Not officially. Officially it was Highland Anomaly 4, but the locals already had a name. The Hall of the Moon's Heart, Bassie said. Solis closed her eyes briefly, as if hearing the name translated by a machine made it smaller than it deserved. Yes, she said. In Aelari ritual language, the phrase is closer to the chamber where the night keeps its living center. Hall of the Moon's Heart is our working translation. Hernandez looked at the structure. It is within an active temple complex? Not just active, Solis said. Central. The Moon Priesthood considers it one of the most sacred sites on the continent. Pilgrims travel for months to reach it. The priestesses who serve there are not local functionaries. They are among the highest religious authorities in the region. Priestesses, I said. Mostly, Solis said. The Selenara priesthood is female-led. There are male attendants, scribes, guards, and associated lineages, but the inner rites belong to women. Nara, standing near the infirmary hatch, had gone very still. I noticed because noticing Nara had become one of my habits. Marsh continued. I was not studying it as an artifact. I was studying the biological effects. She looked frustrated by that. Not embarrassed, frustrated. Scientists dislike discovering they had been asking the right questions for the wrong reason. The stone supports unusual lichen growth, she said. Several species grow nowhere else in the surveyed region. Root systems from nearby plants penetrate the outer fissures and draw up trace elements the surrounding mountain does not contain. There are vines that flower only along the exposed surface, always at night, always during the moon's high cycle. The Aelari treat the flowering as religious confirmation. Could the artifact be causing it? Hernandez asked. Artifact is your word, Marsh said. It is now everyone's word, I said. She accepted that with a small nod. Then yes, I believe the structure is altering the local chemistry in subtle ways. Not radiation in the crude sense, not contamination. More like a persistent material signature leaching into the ecosystem over centuries. Bassie's expression sharpened. Centuries? At least, possibly longer. The Aelari temple was built around the exposed portion, not over it. Their oldest iconography suggests the stone was already sacred before the current temple architecture existed. How old is the visible construction? Solus answered. 600 to 900 local years, depending on which layer we mean. And the structure under it? Marsh looked at the display. Older than the temple, older than the priesthood is currently organized, older perhaps than Aelari civilization in its present form. The room held that for a moment. I thought of the map from Houston. 11 nodes, 2 known. Eden and Aelari Prime. Joseph and Fevai had found the pattern. Thrihiel had found enough to get here first. Marsh had saved the evidence that told us exactly where here was. The Houston map confirms the coordinate, I said. Marsh turned back to me. I brought up the classified overlay. 11 points appeared, most of them still unnamed. Eden glowed. Aelari Prime glowed. The second point expanded until it lined up with Kestrel's Highland anomaly data. The marker landed directly on the Hall of the Moon's heart. Marsh did not speak for several seconds. Then she said very softly, "So that is what I was studying." No one corrected the tense. She was still studying it. She was alive, but everyone in the room understood the feeling. Sometimes knowledge arrives late enough to make the past feel like a room you have already left. "What did Thrihiel get?" I asked. Marsh looked at Lou. Lou answered. "Central Archives, geological survey packages, Solus's formal cultural anthropology files, my command summaries, Khalil's mineral analyses, the pre-contact contamination models." "And Marsh's work?" "They copied what was on the central system," Marsh said, "which was enough." Enough for what? To know where to go. To know which priesthood controlled access. To know which rituals mattered. To know what the Aelari would do if someone arrived claiming sacred authority. She swallowed. To know how to walk into their religion without looking like an invader. That was the line that landed. Not because it surprised me, because it confirmed the read I did not want to be right. Thrihiel had not come to Aelari Prime as a raider. He had come as an interpreter of leverage. A Kehlar in a civilization that already had wolf-masked thresholds, demons, tricksters, and sacred bargains. A man with enough stolen anthropology to make himself comprehensible in the most dangerous possible way. "He also has your deleted threads?" Hernandez asked. "He has copies," Marsh said, "but not the complete cache. The cache includes my personal annotations and field contradictions. Observations that did not make formal archive because I could not yet defend them." "Such as?" Bassie asked. Marsh's mouth tightened in something that might have been a smile if she had not been running a fever. "That the Aelari are less naive than our classifications make them sound." Bassie nodded once, appreciating the point immediately. Marsh turned to me. "Captain, Bronze Age does not mean stupid. It means material constraints. They have politics, factions, skeptics, rival priesthoods, local rulers who resent temple authority. They will not all react the same way to Thrihiel." "Can we use that?" Solus answered before Marsh could. "Carefully." I looked at her. "The Aelari divine order is not decorative. It structures legitimacy. If an outsider manipulates that order, opposition to him will not look like secular resistance. It will look like theological dispute. Which means? It means the people most likely to oppose him are not necessarily kings or soldiers," Solus said. "They may be priests," Marsh added, "especially the Moon priesthood. If he goes to the Hall of the Moon's heart without their consent, he is not just trespassing. He is violating the boundary between night and life." Kimov, who had been silent near the door, spoke for the first time. "Will they fight?" Solus looked at him. "Aelari temple guards will, but they are armed with bronze weapons and ritual authority." "Ritual authority does not stop rifles." "No," Solus said, But it can stop people from giving directions. It can close roads. It can deny food. It can turn every village along a route into a place where no one answers questions. Kimov nodded slowly. That stops armies. The respect in his voice was quiet but real. I looked at the map again. Thrihiel knew where the node was. He knew enough of the religion to approach it. He had a ship in system, a likely ground element, and a head start. He also had fewer resources than before, a second-hand Lenian cargo handler instead of the Fang, and a need to work through a society he did not control. That was not a clean field. It was a messy one. Messy fields were where games were won, if you had the right red. Dr. Himura, Marsh said suddenly. Nara stepped forward. Yes? The food compatibility file. You need the full one before anyone descends. The Central Archive version is incomplete. Because Thrihiel deleted it? Because I never trusted the Central Archive with all of it. Marsh's breath caught. She steadied herself. There are ceremonial foods. Offerings. The wrong refusal could mark you hostile. The wrong acceptance could obligate you. Some are safe for humans, some are not. Nara's expression changed, almost imperceptibly, a doctor hearing the word obligation where she expected poison. What kind of obligation? I asked. Solus answered. Hospitality, recognition, sometimes sacred status. Context matters. Of course it does, I said. Nobody smiled. Marsh leaned forward despite Nara's look of immediate medical disapproval. Captain, if you go down there, they may not receive you as soldiers. What will they receive us as? Solus and Marsh exchanged a glance. Bassi looked at the divine pair file on the wall display and did not speak. I already knew the answer. I had known it since I had reviewed Kestrel's cultural file. Knowing did not make hearing it better. Marsh said, That depends on who sees you first. The room was silent except for the soft hum of Kestrel's failing environmental system and the distant vibration of Singapore holding dock. I looked through the open hatch toward the corridor, where Lou's people were being moved one by one across the docking passage into my ship. Survivors first. Evidence second. Decisions always waiting until the moment when waiting became decision. Then we make sure we know who we are meeting before we step into their story, I said. Marsh's eyes sharpened. That may not be your choice. She was right. That was becoming a theme. We ended the first debrief there because Nara ended it for us. Marsh was escorted back to the infirmary, protesting with the limited force of a scientist whose body had filed an objection and won. Solus went with Bassi to transfer the cultural cache into Singapore's isolated system. Liu and Hernandez began the station status review. Kimov took Chen and Russo back through the corridors to finish clearing compartments, more for certainty than expectation. I stayed in the briefing room for one more minute. The map remained on the display. Eden. Aelari Prime. 9 unnamed points. The Hall of the Moon's heart glowed beneath its overlay, a sacred place built around something older than the civilization worshipping it. Thrihiel had the root. We had the root. The Aelari had the ground. I reached for the Wilson football that was not there, remembered I was not in my ready room, and let my hand fall. Sometimes before the snap, the defense tells you everything. Sometimes it tells you just enough to know the play is going to hurt. I shut down the display and headed for the docking passage. The race was in motion. 14. The Senator. At 5 in the afternoon, Admiral Stephen Archuletta's apartment smelled like smoke, pepper, rendered fat, and something sweet Joseph could not identify, until Steve set the container on the counter and said, "Banana pudding." Joseph looked up from the small dining table. "Pudding has bananas in it? This one does." "Why?" Steve paused with the container in one hand, as though the question had wounded him in some deep regional place. Because civilization occasionally makes correct decisions. Joseph smiled despite himself. The apartment sat high in one of the residential towers on the Houston Navy grounds, close enough to the academy that Joseph could see the old Johnson Space Center campus lights coming on in the early evening. The Gulf was a gray-blue strip beyond the city, hazed by distance and humidity. Traffic moved on the ground far below in quiet streams of white and red. Aircraft descended toward the spaceport in slow, orderly arcs. The apartment itself still felt strange to him after 3 months, not uncomfortable. Steve had worked hard to make sure it did not feel uncomfortable. There were books in the living room, not decorative ones, but real ones with bookmarks and cracked spines. There was a blanket folded over the back of the couch, because Steve claimed every good couch needed a blanket. There were framed photographs on the wall, ships, academy graduations, a younger Steve with officers Joseph did not know, a faded picture of what looked like a family barbecue somewhere under open sky. The kitchen was small but functional, and the table had 4 chairs, even though only 2 people usually ate there. It was not home, but it had become a place where Joseph was allowed to be hungry without asking permission first. That still mattered. Steve had come back from his afternoon meetings carrying 2 insulated bags and a gallon jug of tea the color of dark amber. "I found a place," he had said, as if this explained everything. "A place?" Hole-in-the-wall barbecue joint off navigation. No sign worth mentioning. Folding chairs. Screen door that complains when you open it. Smoker out back older than some colonies. Joseph had learned that when Steve described restaurants that way, the food was usually important. Now the containers covered most of the counter. Sliced brisket, dark at the edges and pink just beneath the bark. Macaroni and cheese in a heavy pan, bright yellow and bubbling at the corners where it had still been hot when packed. Baked beans glossy with sauce and pieces of what Steve said were burnt ends. Cornbread wrapped in foil. Banana pudding in a clear container with layers of pale custard, vanilla wafers, and sliced bananas. The gallon of sweet tea sat beside everything like a piece of industrial equipment. Joseph looked at the food, then at Steve. "This is an early dinner? This is Texas barbecue. It doesn't obey normal meal categories. It is a lot of food. It reheats well." Joseph was not entirely sure that answered the concern, but he had also learned that Steve's hospitality often arrived in quantities that made argument difficult. Steve began setting plates on the table. Brisket first, then sides. Cornbread is not optional. "Is anything optional?" "The beans, technically, but I would think less of you." Joseph took that with the seriousness it deserved and helped carry the containers to the table. They sat across from each other as the city settled into evening beyond the windows. Steve poured sweet tea into 2 glasses. Joseph took a sip and immediately stopped. Steve watched him over the rim of his own glass. Too sweet. Joseph considered the question. On Eden, tea meant herbs, sometimes honey, often something one of the mothers had brewed because a child had a cough or an elder had trouble sleeping. This tasted like someone had taken tea and decided it had not committed hard enough to dessert. "It is very sweet," Joseph said carefully. "That is why it's called sweet tea." I assumed that was descriptive, not a warning. Steve laughed, and the sound made the apartment feel warmer. They ate. The brisket was unlike anything Joseph had known on Eden. The community had raised goats and chickens, and occasionally cattle in shared pasture rotations, but meat was usually prepared simply. Stews, roasts, broths. Food meant to feed households, not announce itself. This announced itself, smoke first, then salt, then black pepper. then fat that softened the meat until it came apart under the fork. The macaroni and cheese was rich enough that Joseph understood why it came in a separate container, as though it required structural isolation. The beans were sweet and smoky, and carried small pieces of meat that made them less a side dish than an argument. The cornbread was dense, slightly sweet, and better when Steve told him to put butter on it. Joseph ate more than he expected. Steve noticed and did not comment. That was one of the things Joseph had come to appreciate about him. Steve noticed everything. But he did not make everything into a conversation. For a while they talked about ordinary things. Joseph's morning with Fevai, the lab's adjusted schedule after the map discovery, the updated security procedures around the cipher room, Steve's meetings with naval intelligence, which he described only in general terms because even inside his own apartment classification did not disappear. Then the conversation slowed. Joseph looked out the window at the academy lights. The history book was still on his tablet in his room, paused in the chapter after first contact. He had read more last night after dinner. The Lennian section had stayed with him in a way he had not expected. 40,000 years, a people taken from Earth before there had been an Earth civilization to remember them. A people who had survived removal, built a world, become themselves, and then met humanity again, when both species had finally reached the stars from different directions. Joseph had read the paragraph about Lenniania 3 times. He had seen Lennians in the lab, Vortagon, Varos in the reports and calls from Singapore, the images in the Coalition Library, the formal diplomatic footage of first Hearth delegations on Earth. Tall, broad, heavy-featured, human and not human, in the way a familiar word became strange if repeated too many times. His blood carried a small piece of that story. For weeks he had thought of that only as a burden. Now he was beginning to think it might also be a door. "Steve," he said. The Admiral looked up from cutting another piece of brisket. "Yes? At some point I want to go to Lenniania." Steve's knife stopped. Only for a second. Then he set it down carefully beside his plate. "All right?" Joseph had expected more resistance than that. The lack of it made the next words easier and harder at the same time. "I don't mean immediately. I know I can't just leave. There is the lab and school and Eden and everything happening with Captain Hansen." He took a breath. "But I have Lennian DNA. Not much, I know that. But enough that everyone keeps studying it. Enough that the cipher responds to me, or at least that I can see things in it. And if everyone is going to keep telling me it matters, then I think I should be allowed to understand what it means from their side, too." Steve leaned back. He did not answer right away. Joseph had learned that this was not dismissal. Steve paused when he wanted to give an answer the dignity of being thought through. "That is a reasonable thing to want," Steve said. "It is?" "Yes. I thought you might say it was dangerous." "It may be. Lots of reasonable things are dangerous." Joseph looked down at his plate. Steve continued, "But there is a difference between running towards something because you are scared of where you are and choosing to go somewhere because you believe it will help you understand yourself. Which one is this?" Joseph thought about that. He thought about Eden, Abraham's house, his brothers, Ruth, whom he knew only through other people's grief, Hannah, who had raised him without asking him to forget the woman who had given birth to him, the field after rain, the kitchen table, scripture at night. He thought about Houston, Fevai's patient voice, the cipher lights, Steve's apartment, sweet tea too sweet to be a beverage, a tablet full of more history than any person could comfortably hold. He thought about Lenniania, a world he had never seen, filled with people who would not be his people exactly, but also would not be strangers in the way most strangers were. "I don't want to stop being from Eden," he said. Steve nodded once. "I don't want to stop being human." "No one worth listening to would ask you to. But I also don't want the Lennian part of me to be something everyone else understands better than I do." Steve's expression softened. "That," he said, "is a very good answer." Joseph felt something loosen in his chest. "We can talk about it," Steve said. "Not tonight as a plan. Tonight as a possibility. There would be diplomatic protocols, medical protocols, security protocols. Your father would need to know. The Lennian government would need to be approached properly. This is not something we would improvise." "I know. But yes, Joseph. At some point, if you still want to go, I will help you explore the possibility." Joseph looked down again. Not because he was embarrassed exactly, but because being taken seriously had a way of making him feel younger rather than older. "Thank you." "You're welcome." Steve picked up his fork again. Joseph did the same. For several minutes, the only sounds were plates, utensils, and the low hum of the apartment's air system. Then the door chime sounded. Joseph looked toward the entry. Steve checked his wrist calm, frowned slightly, and stood. "I know who it is," he said. "Is something wrong?" "No." But his voice had changed enough that Joseph set his fork down. Steve walked to the door and opened it. The man standing outside was older than Joseph expected, though not old in the fragile way some elders on Eden had become. He carried himself carefully, with the composed posture of someone who had spent many years entering rooms where everyone already had an opinion about him. His hair was silver at the temples, his face lined but alert. He wore a dark civilian suit rather than a uniform, and the small pin on his lapel showed the seal of the Human Coalition Senate. Joseph knew him from public feeds and from the briefings Steve had shown him when explaining who handled Eden's protectorate matters in Berlin. Senator Marcus Whitford, the appointed senator for Eden, retired coalition diplomat, trusted by the protectorate communities. Not from Eden, but one of the few outsiders Abraham Thompson had once described, in a letter after the Trappist incident, as a man who understood that leaving people alone was not the same as abandoning them. "Admiral," Whitford said. "Senator." They shook hands. Whitford's gaze moved past Steve and found Joseph at the table. "Joseph," he said gently, "may I come in?" Joseph stood because Eden manners were older than his confusion. "Yes, sir." Steve stepped aside and let the senator enter. Whitford did not come farther than the edge of the living room at first. His eyes took in the table, the containers of barbecue, the gallon of sweet tea, the 2 plates. Something like regret moved across his face. "I apologize for interrupting dinner." Steve glanced back at the table. "There's enough brisket to feed a subcommittee." "That is the most Texan sentence I have heard today." "It has been a Texan day." Whitford smiled faintly, but the smile did not stay. He held something in his left hand. A folded envelope, not printed, not polymer, paper. Real paper, cream-colored, slightly rough at the edges, sealed without decoration. Joseph knew before the senator said anything. His father. The apartment seemed to go quiet around him. Whitford crossed the room slowly and stopped at the near side of the table. He did not hand the envelope over immediately. "I came from Berlin this afternoon," he said. "Before that, I was on Eden." Joseph's fingers curled against the back of his chair. "You saw him." "I did." "How is he?" Whitford's face carried the answer before his words did. "Tired," he said. "Grieving. Working too much. Stubborn in the way men sometimes become when they believe stopping would require them to feel everything at once." Joseph looked down. That sounded like Abraham. "He is alive," Whitford said. "Your brothers are alive. The household is being cared for. The settlement is rebuilding, slowly but truly." Joseph nodded. He could not make himself speak yet. Whitford placed the envelope on the table, careful not to set it on any food container or plate. "Your father asked me to carry this by hand." Joseph stared at it. A handwritten letter. From Eden to Houston. Across all the distance between who he had been and who he was becoming. Steve remained standing by the kitchen counter, silent. Whitford did not sit. He did not fill the room with official language. He seemed to understand that in this moment the Senate of the human coalition mattered less than a father's handwriting. "He did not ask me to read it," Whitford said. "He did not tell me what it says. He only asked that I place it directly into your hands." Joseph reached for the envelope. His hand hesitated above it. For a moment he was afraid of the paper. Not because Abraham would be cruel. Abraham had never been cruel to him. Hard, yes. Certain, yes. Sometimes distant in ways Joseph had not known how to name until Houston gave him other adults to compare him to. But not cruel. He was afraid because the letter would sound like home. And home had become complicated. He picked it up. The paper was warm from the room. His name was written on the front in Abraham's hand. Joseph, no title, no surname, no formal address, just Joseph. His throat tightened. Whitford watched him with quiet patience. Steve finally spoke. "Senator, would you like a plate?" Whitford looked at him, surprised. Steve gestured to the counter. "Brisket, mac and cheese, beans, cornbread, banana pudding if Joseph leaves any." Joseph laughed once, unexpectedly and unevenly. Whitford's expression softened. "I would not want to impose." "You carried a letter from Eden by hand," Steve said. "You can impose on barbecue." That settled it. Whitford removed his suit jacket and accepted a plate. Joseph kept the envelope beside his hand while Steve served the senator brisket and sides. For a few minutes the apartment became strangely ordinary again. A senator at the table. An admiral pouring sweet tea. A boy from Eden holding a letter from his father while banana pudding waited in a plastic container near the edge of the counter. Whitford tried the brisket and closed his eyes briefly. "This," he said, "is better than Berlin." "Most barbecue is," Steve said. "Do not tell my colleagues I said so." "I'll classify it." Joseph smiled, but his hand remained on the envelope. Whitford saw it. "You do not have to read it with us here," he said, "and you do not have to read it alone." Joseph looked at Steve. Steve nodded. "Your choice. Your choice." Houston had given him many frightening things. Blood tests, questions, maps, histories that made the world larger and less certain than it had been before. It had also given him those two words. Joseph looked down at his father's handwriting. Then he carefully broke the seal. 15, the letter. Joseph read the letter once at the table. He read it with Steve sitting across from him and Senator Whitford politely looking elsewhere, as though the apartment window had suddenly become the most interesting view in Houston. He read it with the smell of brisket still in the room, with half a glass of sweet tea beside his plate, with the banana pudding container open on the counter, and the evening light settling against the towers beyond the glass. He read it because not reading it would have been harder. Then dinner continued, though not exactly as it had before. Senator Whitford ate a second piece of cornbread and asked Steve about the Academy's current class size. Steve answered. Joseph listened. He said very little. No one pressed him. That was a mercy, though he did not know whether the mercy belonged to Steve, the senator, or the letter lying folded beside his plate. When Whitford finally left, he shook Joseph's hand with both of his. "Your father wanted you to have it," he said. Joseph nodded. "Thank you for bringing it." "It was my honor." The words could have sounded formal. From Whitford they did not. They sounded like something carried carefully across distance. After the senator was gone, Steve cleaned the table without asking Joseph to help. Joseph tried anyway, because sitting still felt wrong, but Steve only handed him the banana pudding container and said, "Put that in the refrigerator before I make a bad decision." Joseph did. Then he took the letter and went to his room. The room was not large, but it was his. That still felt strange. On Eden, space belonged to households before it belonged to individuals. Bedrooms were shared by brothers. Drawers held folded clothing more by necessity than ownership. Quiet was something found outside, at the fence line or in the field before morning chores. Here the door closed. The apartment sound softened behind it. Steve moving in the kitchen. Water running. A cabinet opening. The low hum of Houston's air systems. The distant sound of aircraft descending toward the spaceport. Joseph sat at the small desk by the window and unfolded the letter again. The paper resisted slightly at the creases. Abraham's handwriting filled the page. That was the first thing that mattered, not the words. Not yet. The handwriting. It carried the family weight Joseph had been missing. The letters leaned forward the way Abraham's writing always had, firm and spare, with no wasted loops and no decoration. Joseph had seen that hand on ledger books, seed orders, household repair lists, scripture notes, boundary agreements, and the small labels Abraham used to tie onto jars in the pantry when a harvest had been good enough to store. The handwriting belonged to home in a way no official message ever could. Joseph touched the edge of the page with one finger. Then he read, "My son Joseph." He stopped there longer than he expected. My son, not Joseph Thompson. Not the boy under coalition protection. Not the genetic subject. Not the key. Not the 1%. Not the survivor of Eden, or the child Fevai asked to look at impossible patterns, or the boy Steve had taken into his apartment because there was nowhere else he could safely be. My son Joseph. He kept reading. Abraham asked how he was. The question was written plainly, without ornament, but Joseph could hear his father's voice inside it. Not soft exactly. Abraham had never been a soft man, but careful. Direct in the way men from Eden were direct when emotion stood behind a door and everyone knew it was there. He asked whether Joseph was eating well. He asked whether the admiral treated him kindly, though the next sentence said that from Senator Whitford's reports, Abraham believed he did. He asked whether the work was frightening. That question made Joseph set the letter down for a moment. He looked out the window. Houston glowed against the evening. The city did not care that he was reading a letter from a father who had never seen it. Lights came on. Aircraft moved. Somewhere on the Navy grounds, students crossed walkways toward dining halls and lecture rooms. Somewhere beneath the complex, the cipher lab waited for morning. Was the work frightening? Yes, not always. Sometimes it was beautiful. Sometimes the patterns opened under his eyes and the room seemed to become larger, as though the universe had leaned slightly closer and trusted him with one of its hidden shapes. Sometimes Fevai explained something, and he felt, for a few minutes, that he was not lost at all, but learning a language he had been born almost able to hear. But yes, the work was frightening. The letter did not ask whether he was brave. Joseph appreciated that. He picked it up again. Abraham wrote that the family thought of him every day. His brothers asked questions faster than the adults could answer. Hannah had made the stew Joseph liked, then remembered halfway through that Joseph was not there to eat it, and had cried in the pantry where she thought no one saw her. The younger children still included him in the evening chore count and had to be corrected. The community prayed for him. Joseph read that sentence twice. He did not know what he felt. Once it would have comforted him simply. The community prayed. Therefore he was held. Therefore the distance did not have the final word. That was how Eden had taught him to understand prayer. Not as a transaction, not exactly, but as a joining of voices around a name. Now the sentence did not land as cleanly. The community prayed for him. Did they pray he would come home unchanged? Did they pray he would be protected from the world he was now living inside? Did they pray the Lennian blood would mean nothing? Did they pray it would mean something only if that something could be folded back into the life he had left? Abraham did not say. That helped. The letter did not command. It did not explain the cipher as providence. It did not call Houston dangerous, though Abraham must have believed parts of it were. It did not accuse Steve. It did not mention Fevai except to say that Senator Whitford had spoken well of the children's scientist who worked with him, and that Joseph should show courtesy to those who showed him care. Joseph smiled faintly at that. Abraham could turn almost anything into instruction. Near the end, Abraham wrote about home. The north field irrigation had been restored. The west fence still needed work. 2 of the goats had gotten into the winter stores and made themselves sick. Joseph's brother David had dropped a hammer on his foot while helping repair a roof and had insisted he was fine until he fainted at supper. The rebuilt houses were not the same as the old ones, but they stood. He did not ask Joseph to come home. He did not say Joseph should not. That absence was the largest thing in the letter. Joseph read the last paragraph 3 times. There is a place for you here, as there has always been. There may also be work given to you elsewhere that I do not yet understand. I will not pretend to understand it before I do. Remember who you are. Remember that you are loved. Write when you can. The signature was simple. Your father, Abraham Thompson. Joseph sat with the page open under his hands. He did not cry. For a while he wondered whether that meant something was wrong with him. He had cried before. After Eden. Quietly, where Steve could not hear, though Steve probably had. In the lab once, when Fevai had said something kind in a way that made kindness impossible to defend against. He had cried for Ruth, whom he did not remember, and for home, which he remembered too well. But he did not cry now. The letter had not broken something open. It had placed something back. Not all of it. Not enough to make him whole in the way he had been before Trappist 1 and the Fang and the cipher in Houston. Maybe that version of whole was gone. Maybe it had only been childhood and had passed without asking permission. But the handwriting was real. His father was real. Home was not simple anymore, but it had not vanished. Joseph folded the letter along its original creases. He opened the desk drawer. Inside were a few things that belonged to him now, the stylus Steve had given him, a small notebook from the academy store, a printed schedule, a smooth stone from the landscaped path outside the lab that he had picked up one morning without knowing why. He placed the letter beneath the notebook, then changed his mind and put it on top. He closed the drawer. Then he sat at the desk for a long time. Outside, Houston moved into night. Joseph did not turn on the tablet. He did not open the history book. He did not message Fevai or ask Steve another question or take the letter back out to read it again. He only sat. In the next room, Steve's footsteps passed once in the hallway and stopped outside the door. Joseph heard the pause. He knew Steve was deciding whether to knock. After a moment, the footsteps moved on. Joseph was grateful. He sat until the window showed more of his reflection than the city. A 14-year-old boy from Eden, with human blood and Linnean fragments, and a father's handwriting hidden in the drawer. He looked older than he felt. He looked younger than the work required. He kept sitting anyway. 16 vector to Aelari Prime. Hernandez closed Kestrel for us. That was the simplest way to say it, though simple phrases often hide the most work. By the time I returned from the last debriefing session with Marsh, Hernandez had already done what good XOs do, taken the problem I did not have enough hours to personally manage, and turned it into a plan that other people could execute. She briefed me in the situation room with the Kestrel schematic still hovering above the table and the casualty transfer board open beside it. The survivors were aboard Singapore, except for the small group who had volunteered to remain on Kestrel long enough to keep the post alive. 3 engineering support personnel would stay with them under Ensign Wilcox, along with Lou and Okafor, both of whom had refused evacuation until the station's environmental controls were stable enough to survive the gap before reinforcements arrived. "Refused is a strong word," Hernandez had said. "Accurate? Yes." That made 6 souls left on Kestrel, 3 Marines, 2 Kestrel personnel, and 1 medical corpsman with enough supplies for 2 weeks. Coalition reinforcement vessels were still weeks out. The observation post was damaged, underpowered, and angry at every system it had left, but it was not dying. Varos had helped Okafor rebuild enough of the power routing to keep atmosphere stable. Nara had signed off on the medical risk with the expression of a doctor who had agreed to a thing and wanted the universe to know it was on probation. Marsh would come with us. That part had not been in question for very long. She was wounded, feverish, and too valuable to leave behind. She was also the only person alive who had spent 2 years studying the ecosystem around the Hall of the Moon's heart and had taken better notes than her own command structure knew existed. Bassi had already absorbed Marsh's cache into Singapore's isolated science partition, and the 2 of them had spent the morning building a combined working document: biology, religion, geography, food compatibility, likely priesthood response, and all the small details that turn a planet from scenery into a place. Hernandez had described that session with unusual brevity. "Bassi has found her counterpart." That told me enough. Bassi had the framework. Marsh had the dirt under her fingernails. Between them, the Aelari Prime file was becoming something that might keep us alive. Hernandez also arranged the outbound traffic we were not sending yet. The stealth courier from Houston remained shielded. Our own status packet to Houston was staged but held. Once we cleared Kestrel and disappeared into Aelari Prime's night side, Bishop would choose the moment for launch. Until then, silence mattered more than reassurance. I approved Hernandez's plan with 2 changes, both small, both practical. First, the Marines staying behind would get one of Gibby's emergency food crates, in addition to ration packs. Morale mattered, even on wounded observation posts held together by sealant and stubbornness. Second, Lou would be given my personal assurance that Singapore was not abandoning Kestrel. Hernandez accepted both changes without comment. That was how I knew she approved. Now I stood on the bridge and watched Kestrel shrink in the aft display. "Docking collar disengaged," Bishop said. "Soft separation complete. No seal damage. Port side androgynous assembly retracting." Varos's voice came over the engineering channel. "The lower port quadrant will require inspection after this operation." That sounded almost optimistic, Bishop said. "It was not intended to." Noted. Kestrel drifted behind us, dark in places where a station should never be dark, alive in places that mattered. Its emergency lights blinked along the docking arm we had just left. Somewhere inside, Lou, Okafor, Ayala, and the others were settling into the cold patience of waiting for help to arrive. I hated leaving them. Command rarely gives you the luxury of liking the right decision. "Any movement from the cargo handler?" I asked. Bassi checked the passive display. "No. Thrihiel's ship remains far side lunar. Low power posture unchanged." Aelari Prime's moon occupied the main display, pale and cratered, one face forever turned toward the world below. Like Earth's moon, it was tidally locked, caught in the long gravitational agreement, that made one hemisphere familiar to the planet's surface, and the other permanently hidden from any eyes that had not learned to leave the ground. To the Aelari there was the face of the moon. To us, there was the side where people hid things. Thrihiel's ship sat on that hidden side, tucked into a crater wall, and powered down as if invisibility were a matter of choosing the correct shadow. Against a Bronze Age civilization, it was. No Aelari astronomer, priest, sailor, farmer, or child looking up through jungle canopy would ever see it. No myth would record the shape of a second-hand Lenian cargo handler resting in a place their entire civilization had no means to observe. Against a spacefaring civilization, the far side of the moon was not invisible. It was a note on the search checklist. "Bishop," I said, "take us down." "Aye, Captain." She moved Singapore with the same restraint she had used on the Kestrel approach. No aggressive burn, no bright engine plume. We slid away from the station and toward the gravity well of Aelari Prime under a profile designed to look, from a distance, like nothing in particular. The planet grew ahead of us. Aelari Prime was beautiful in a way that made the situation worse. Some worlds looked hostile from orbit, all iron deserts or storm belts or ice fields that warned you in advance not to expect kindness. Aelari Prime gave no warning. Green cloud systems rolled over river-cut continents. Oceans flashed silver where sunlight caught them. The night side curved away under a wash of darkness, broken only by lightning flickers and the faintest suggestion of firelight in places where cities had not yet learned to glow from orbit. No industrial signatures, no radio spill, no navigation beacons, no orbital debris except what Coalition observation had put there and what Thrihiel had brought with him. A world still young enough to believe the sky belonged to gods. We were about to hide in its night. "Orbital insertion track coming up," Bishop said. "Low-profile vector, night-side capture. I can keep us below the moon's direct line of sight for 42 minutes if we accept a rougher thermal margin." Define rougher. Varos will complain. That is not a useful measure. Varos complains when the universe expands inefficiently. Varos's voice came back immediately. Expansion is not the issue. Waste heat is. Bishop smiled without looking away from the controls. "See? Can we hold the margin?" I asked. "We can," Varos said, "but the ship will not enjoy it." Ships don't enjoy anything. That is a limited human view. I decided not to ask. Hernandez sat to my left, reviewing the approach geometry. She had slept 2 hours in the past 20. It showed only in the fact that she was slightly more precise than usual, which was how Claudia Hernandez got tired, by becoming weaponized procedure. "Once we enter nightside orbit," she said, "we have 3 priorities. Confirm descent evidence from Thrihiel's team. Maintain observation of the cargo handler's lunar position. Launch the status drone to Houston from a masked outbound vector. And if the cargo handler moves while we're behind the planet, Bassey's relay model should catch the thermal change by reflected scatter off the moon's near limb." "Should," Bassey said. Hernandez looked at her. Bassey did not flinch. "It should catch it. I cannot make passive physics more certain by phrasing." "I appreciate the honesty," Hernandez said. "People say that until they receive it." Kimov stood near the aft bulkhead, helmet tucked under one arm. He had been quiet since we left Kestrel. That usually meant he was either thinking about violence or remembering some older version of it. "Lieutenant," I said. His eyes moved to me. "Captain, surface planning?" 3 branches. First, observe only. Second, insert near Thrihiel's projected route and avoid contact with Aelari settlements. Third, insert through controlled contact with Aelari authority if avoidance is impossible. Preference? Professionally? That is generally how I ask tactical questions. None are good. Pick the least bad. Observation first, insertion second. Controlled contact only if forced. That was the Marine answer. It was also probably the right one, at least before Bassie finished scaring us with her religious framework. The planet filled more of the display. We crossed the outer edge of its shadow. Sunlight fell away. The bridge lighting dimmed automatically another degree, more psychological than necessary. The forward viewport showed the night side now. Aelari Prime as a dark curve edged in blue atmospheric glow. Stars burned above it, honest and indifferent. Night side capture in 30 seconds, Bishop said. I rested my hands on the armrests. There was no thunder, no drama, just Bishop's hands, Varos's heat curves, Bassie's passive returns, and the long arithmetic of orbital mechanics. Capture burn, Bishop said. The deck trembled. Not much. A small vibration through the soles of my boots. The kind of thing a passenger might not notice, and a captain noticed because his ship had just made a promise to gravity. Thermal bleed rising, Varos said. Compensating, Bishop replied. Compensate less elegantly and more efficiently. I'm flying a stealth insertion around a Bronze Age planet, while hiding from a stolen Lenian cargo hauler behind a tidally locked moon. Elegance is all I have left. You also have mathematics. Fine, elegance and mathematics. The ship settled into orbit. Aelari Prime's night side moved beneath us. For a moment no one spoke. Then Bassie said, Orbit confirmed. Low profile track holding. No indication we were detected. Cargo handler, I asked. Still hidden. Still cold. Still on the moon's far side. Bishop leaned back half an inch, just enough to show the hard part of the maneuver was over. Thrihiel really did pick the far side like every villain with a moon and a secret. Against the Aelari it is perfectly chosen, Bassie said. Against us? Predictable. Thank you. Not a compliment. I'll take it anyway. I looked at the tactical display. The geometry mattered. The moon's near side faced the planet permanently. The far side faced away from every Aelari eye that had ever looked up and wondered what lay beyond the night. Thrihiel's cargo handler was hidden from the surface by celestial mechanics older than civilization. If his plan required the Aelari never to see the ship, he had succeeded. But we were not on the surface. We were in low orbit, tucked into Aelari Prime's darkness, watching the Watcher. Hernandez, I said. Status drone? Ready, Bishop? I can launch on the next shadowed outbound angle. It won't point directly back toward Houston at first, but it will clear the system cold and correct after the first course adjustment. Do it. Aye, Captain. A few seconds later, Deck 4 reported the courier cradle loaded. We did not feel the launch. The drone left Singapore like a secret, leaving one pocket for another, small, dark, and carrying enough truth to start several arguments in rooms very far away. Houston would know we had arrived. Houston would know Kestrel had survivors. Houston would know the map had been received, and the Aelari Prime node confirmed. Houston would not know what we were about to do next until long after the next decision had already become history. That was the shape of the age we lived in. FTL ships, courier drones, ancient maps, still no way around command. Bring up the senior staff package, I said. Hernandez transferred the working file to the main table display behind us in the situation room. I stayed in the chair for another few seconds, watching the dark planet turn. The Aelari were down there. Thrihiel was probably down there too, and somewhere beneath a temple called the Hall of the Moon's Heart, a precursor node waited inside a civilization that had mistaken memory for myth and myth for order. Maybe that was not so different from the rest of us. I stood. Senior staff to the Situation Room, 10 minutes. Hernandez rose with me. As we crossed aft, I glanced once more at the display showing the moon. One face toward the world. One face hidden. A simple physical fact that an entire civilization had built into the background of its religion without ever knowing what it concealed. Bishop was right. Human science fiction had taught us to look behind the moon. Aelari religion had taught them to look at its face. Thrihiel had chosen the gap between those two truths. Now we had to decide how to step into it without breaking the world underneath. The Watch That Sees. The Situation Room smelled faintly of coffee, medical antiseptic, and Kestrel. That last part was not a smell any ship designer included in a system specification. But it was there anyway. Stale air, scorched insulation, emergency sealant, and the human residue of people who had spent too long waiting to find out whether they were going to die in a locked compartment. Marsh sat at the far end of the table with a medical monitor clipped to her wrist, and Nara standing close enough to read it without seeming to hover. That was a difficult trick. Nara accomplished it by pretending she was not hovering and trusting the rest of us to be polite about the fiction. Marsh looked better than she had on Kestrel. That was not the same thing as looking well. Bassie stood beside the wall display with Marsh's recovered cash layered over Kestrel's formal cultural files. Hernandez sat to my right. Bishop had come off the bridge for the briefing, leaving helm to her relief officer. Varos occupied the chair at the engineering end of the table, broad shoulders making the furniture look theoretical. Kimov stood rather than sat, because asking Mikhail Kimov to relax in a briefing room was like asking a knife to become a spoon. I took my place at the head of the table. "Begin," I said. Bassie brought up Aelari Prime. The planet rotated above the table, green and blue under bands of cloud. Then the display narrowed to the central continent, the mountain range, the temple complex, and finally the Hall of the Moon's heart. Marsh spoke first. "My biological data by itself will not keep you alive," she said. "Neither will the cultural file by itself. The risk is in the overlap." "That is usually where risks live," I said. Her mouth twitched faintly. "Then I will be direct. The ecosystem around the Hall of the Moon's heart is treated by the Aelari as religious evidence. Certain flowers bloom only under moonlight. Certain root vegetables grow only in soil fed by runoff from the exposed stone. Lichens on the inner walls change color during the lunar high cycle. The priesthood does not distinguish those as biological effects and religious signs. They are the same fact." Bassie advanced the display. Images appeared. Pale flowers against black stone, root clusters wrapped through mineral seams, blue-white lichen glowing under moonlight. "The Aelari religious framework is built around the divine pair," Bassie said. "Aurelian, the Sun Father, opener of day. Silunara, the Moon Mother, opener of night. They are married, not symbolically married. Liturgically, cosmologically, socially married. Their union is the structure that makes time orderly." Nara folded her arms. "And Hansen and I match the wrong shape." Bassie looked at her. "Yes." "Say it plainly," I said. Bassie did. "If a human male and female arrive from the sky in a shuttle, especially near the Hall of the Moon's heart, or any settlement tied to the Moon priesthood, the Aelari will almost certainly interpret the arrival through the divine pair framework." "Almost certainly," Hernandez repeated. Marsh leaned forward slightly. "No, more than almost. If they witness the arrival, it is a near certainty. The framework is too specific. Sun god and moon goddess, married, descending from the sky in a time of need. arriving when a wolf-faced threshold figure has violated sacred boundaries. They will not need to invent the interpretation. Their culture has already written it for them. The room went quiet. Bishop broke it because Bishop was Bishop. So to be clear, we are not talking about might be mistaken for gods in the vague historical sense. We are talking about the Aelari having the exact theological filing cabinet ready. That is an inelegant way to state it, Bassi said, but yes, great. It is not great, I know. That was sarcasm. Varos looked from Bishop to Bassi. This is one of the contexts where the human tone contradicts the lexical meaning. Correct, Bishop said. I'm improving. You are. I looked at the display again. Sun Father, Moon Mother married, descending from the sky. Nara and I had not yet gone down to Aelari Prime, and the planet was already trying to turn us into a story. I do not like this, Hernandez said. No one does, I said. Marsh looked at me. Captain, liking it is irrelevant. The question is whether you can move through the culture without making the wrong denial at the wrong time. I was planning to deny being a god. That may be morally satisfying, Bassi said. It may also be socially catastrophic. I turned to her. Explain. If the Aelari have already placed you inside a sacred framework, blunt denial may not be received as humility. It could be understood as a test, a taboo response, or a concealment required by ritual. In some recorded hymns, Aurelian and Selenara hide their faces before revealing judgment. Refusal of divine identity does not necessarily remove divine identity. That is convenient, Bishop said. For religion, yes, Bassi said. Nara's expression was controlled, but I knew the small tension at the corners of her mouth. What about offerings? Marsh nodded as if she had expected the question. Critical. Food offerings are a primary hospitality ritual. Refusing them may close the door against the household or temple making the offering. Accepting them may create obligation. Which obligation depends on what is offered, who offers it, and where. Nara looked toward me, then back to Marsh. In Shinto practice, she said, there is a concept called shinsen. Food and drink offerings presented to the kami at shrines. Rice, sake salt, water, vegetables, fish, fruit. It is not simply feeding a god. It is respect, purification, relationship. Bassi nodded. That is a useful analogy. It is also dangerous, Nara said, because if I understand the analogy too well, I may become more convincing. No one had a good answer to that. I certainly did not. Hernandez leaned forward. Can we avoid being seen? Marsh answered. Possibly, but not reliably. The jungle canopy is dense, but the routes to the hall are inhabited and ritually monitored. The priesthood watches the roads. Pilgrims move in groups. Temple attendants tend gardens near the outer terraces. Any descent close enough to be useful risks observation. Then we land farther out, Kimov said. And march through jungle, Marsh replied. Which increases time, exposure to predators, disease risk, and the chance of entering a sacred grove by accident. Kimov considered that. Sacred groves are marked? To Aelari eyes, yes. Not to ours. Exactly. Bassi shifted the display to a map of approach routes. There are 3 viable landing zones. Zone 1 is closest to the temple but highest cultural exposure. Zone 2 is farther south, lower population density but difficult terrain. Zone 3 is near a river route used by pilgrims and traders. Which one minimizes footprint? I asked. None, Bassi said. That is not one of the options I wanted. Zone 2 minimizes immediate cultural contact, Marsh said. It also increases physical risk. Kimov looked at the terrain. Physical risk we can manage. Can we? Marsh asked. You are planning to move through an alien jungle with 2 wounded civilizations and 1 rogue Kehlar between you and the objective. I said manage. I did not say enjoy. That from Kemov was practically optimism. I turned the problem over in my head. Large landing party meant security. It also meant more boots in the wrong place, more chances to be seen, more people for the Aelari to interpret, more contamination, more ways for doctrine to fail in public. Small party meant vulnerability. Small party meant speed. Small party meant fewer mistakes. We minimize footprint, I said. Hernandez looked at me because she already knew what that meant. Landing party, I continued. Myself. Dr. Himura. Dr. Marsh, if Dr. Himura determines she has recovered enough for sustained landing operation. Marsh opened her mouth. Nara spoke before she could. I will determine that. Marsh closed her mouth. I looked at Nara. Well? Nara glanced at the medical monitor, then at Marsh, then at me. She is not fully recovered, Nara said. But she is stable enough for a limited duration ground operation if she is monitored directly by me, carries no heavy load, and obeys medical instructions the first time they are given. Marsh said, I can do that. Nara looked at her. Marsh amended, I can attempt that. Better, Nara said. I continued. Kemov plus 2 Marines. Kemov did not hesitate. Chen and Russo. I nodded. Agreed. Bishop shifted in her chair. I assume I'm flying the shuttle. You are. And then, you return to Singapore unless the situation requires extraction standby. She did not like that. She also did not argue, which told me she knew why. Hernandez's voice was level. I retain command aboard Singapore. You do, if contact escalates? You protect the ship, Kestrel, and the Aelari from orbit in that order, unless circumstances change. That is not a comfortable order. I know. Comfortable orders were for training exercises. Varos had been silent for several minutes, which meant he was either thinking or deciding how bluntly to be correct. Captain, he said. Yes? If Thrihiel is on the surface, extraction may require containment. I know. I recommend preparing a secure area in the cargo bay. I was about to order it. His brow lowered slightly in approval. Deck 4, I said. Cargo bay holding cell. Not comfortable but humane. Restraints compatible with Kehlar physiology. No exposed panels, no tool access, no line of sight to shuttle controls, independent environmental monitoring. Varos nodded. My team can fabricate and reinforce a temporary cell. Do it. Bishop looked at me. You're planning to bring him back. I am planning not to let him walk away like he did on Eden. The room changed. Not dramatically. No one gasped. No one spoke over me. But the air shifted because everyone at that table understood the name I had not said next. Joseph. On Eden, Thrihiel had escaped with the Trappist artifact. We had saved Joseph. We had saved what we could. But Thrihiel had walked away. Not again. Kemov's eyes held mine for half a second. He understood. Marines understood capture as a discipline distinct from killing. Harder, usually. More dangerous, often. But sometimes necessary because dead enemies stop moving and living enemies answer questions. Hernandez said, capture if possible. Yes. And if not possible? I looked at the map of Aelari Prime. If he threatens the landing party, the Aelari, or the artifact site, Kemov has authority to use necessary force. Kemov gave one small nod. Nara did not look pleased, neither did I. That brings us back to the divine pair problem, Bassi said. Unfortunately, I said. Marsh straightened with visible effort. If the Aelari receive you as Aurelian and Selunara, the worst thing you can do is improvise theology you do not understand. That was not on my list, I said. It will be tempting. Authority will be offered to you. People may kneel. They may ask questions. They may bring the sick. They may ask for judgment. If you answer too freely, you alter their religious development. If you refuse too harshly, you may create panic or factional violence. What do we do? Nara asked. Bassi brought up a short list. First, avoid declarations. Second, accept hospitality only when refusal would cause harm, and even then allow Marsh or me to advise if possible. Third, use language of peace, healing, and protection without confirming divine status. Fourth, do not perform technology publicly unless necessary to save life. Nara gave a dry little laugh. Medicine will be interpreted as miracle. Yes, Bassi said. I hate that. I assumed you would. Nara folded her arms tighter. I am a doctor, not a goddess. No one laughed. The line should have been funny. On another day, maybe it would have been. Here in this room, above a world that might decide otherwise, it landed as a protest. Marsh's voice softened. Dr. Himura, the Aelari may not give you the choice of being understood correctly. Nara looked at her. For a moment, the briefing room was not tactical. It was human, or human enough to include Lenian, Martian, children adjacent science, Marines, and a doctor from Osaka who had just been told that an entire civilization might look at her and see the Moon Mother returned. I know, Nara said. I reached under the table and found her hand. Only for a second. Long enough. Then I let go because captains did not get to hold on to private comfort in public longer than the room could bear. We are not going down there to play gods, I said. We are going down there to stop Thrihiel, recover or secure the precursor node, and avoid doing permanent harm to the Aelari, if any such path still exists. Bassi's expression was careful. And if the only path requires accepting their framework temporarily. I looked at the rotating planet above the table. That was the question, of course. Doctrine said one thing. Reality said another. The Aelari would see what they had been taught to see. Thrihiel would exploit what they believed. If we refused to navigate the culture because the culture made us uncomfortable, then we would not be morally pure. We would be useless. Then we navigate it, I said. We do not enjoy it. We do not believe it. We do not exploit it beyond what is necessary to prevent greater harm, but we navigate it. Hernandez nodded slowly. Kimov said, Rules of engagement for worship? Bishop looked at him. That is the worst sentence I have ever heard. It is also the correct question, Varos said. I exhaled. Respectful distance, no mockery, no theatrical displays, no accepting titles unless refusing them causes immediate danger, no promises we cannot keep, no prophecies, no blessings unless Dr. Himura determines the cultural equivalent is medically or psychologically necessary. Nara looked at me. You are delegating blessings to medical? I am trying to keep us alive. That is not the same thing? No, I said, it isn't. Marsh closed her eyes briefly. That may work, or it may fail immediately. Those are always the options, I said. Bishop leaned back. For what it's worth, I vote we try very hard not to descend in a beam of light. Noted. And no dramatic shuttle silhouette against the moon. Also noted. That one may be unavoidable, Bassi said. Bishop pointed at her. Do not tell the pilot that. Varos said. If the landing zone is nightside relative to local settlement, a moonlit descent silhouette is mathematically probable. Bishop groaned. You are all terrible for morale. Gibby is morale, I said. We are planning. That got the smallest laugh from the room, which was enough. I stood. The briefing ended because the next phase needed action more than thought. Bassi, refine cultural contact card for the landing party. Marsh, work with her, and then report to medical. Nara, final medical clearance on Marsh and ground kits. Kimov, Chen, and Russo on full inspection. Bishop, Shuttle 1 ready for low signature descent. Hernandez, ship remains in silent overwatch. Varos, build me that cell. They answered in sequence. Aye, Captain. Yes, sir. Understood. I stayed in the Situation Room after the others began to move. The display still showed Aelari Prime, night rolling across green continents beneath a moon whose far side hid Thrihiel's ship. Sunfather, Moonmother, married, descending from the sky in time of need. A story waiting so specifically that it felt less like coincidence than a trap built by culture itself. Nara stopped beside me on her way out. I meant it, she said quietly. I know. I am not a goddess. No, I said. You are not. She looked at the planet. But if someone brings me a sick child? The question hurt because I knew the answer, and so did she. Then you will be a doctor, I said. She nodded once. Then she left to prepare medical kits for a landing that might become a miracle the moment anyone saw it. I stood alone for another few seconds, looking down at the world we were trying not to change. Then I went to get ready to descend. 18. Final preparation. The night before we descended to Aelari Prime, I sat alone in my ready room and tried not to think of myself as a god. That was harder than it should have been. Not because I believed it. I did not. No part of me had suddenly decided that commanding a prototype frigate, surviving 3 months of political scrutiny, and getting mistaken for a religious archetype by a Bronze Age civilization qualified me for divinity. The problem was not belief. The problem was function. If a culture had a shape waiting for you, and you stepped into that shape, whether you meant to or not, then your intentions became only part of the equation. Maybe the smallest part. The Aelari would see what their history had taught them to see. Thrihiel knew that. Marsh knew that. Bassi had proven it with enough cross-referenced ritual language to make denial feel less like humility and more like malpractice. I sat behind my desk with the Wilson football in both hands, turning it slowly so the laces passed under my thumb. On the wall, Kennedy looked down in the Schickler portrait, arms folded and head bowed. The painting had never looked triumphant to me. That was why I kept it there. It was not the image of a man certain of himself. It was the image of a man carrying the weight of decisions that would outlive him. Jack, I said quietly, neither of us likes this one. The painting, as usual, declined to rescue me. I looked away from Kennedy and toward the models on my desk. Singapore, Victory, Enterprise CV6, Vostok, Apollo, and the Enterprise NCC-1701, the small, clean lines of a future that had never existed and somehow still mattered. Nara had given me that model after the Warden confirmation. She had not said much when she handed it to me. She rarely needed to. The little starship sat now among ships that had been real, which should have made it look ridiculous. It did not. There were worse command philosophies than the one that said the mission mattered, the people mattered more, and the right answer was usually the one that let you look your own crew in the eye afterward. The question, I decided, was not what would Jesus do. I was not qualified for that standard, and bringing human theology into a non-interference crisis over an alien world seemed like exactly the kind of thing future ethics instructors would use as a negative example. The more operational question was, what would James T. Kirk do? Probably something reckless, morally sincere, technically illegal, and ultimately defensible in a court-martial, only because the alternative had been worse. I was trying very hard to keep the reckless portion under control. The landing orders sat on the desk display. No one in the landing party would wear a coalition Navy or Marine uniform. That had been my first non-negotiable decision. We could not look like an armed expedition from the sky. We also could not dress like Aelari. The average Aelari stood around 4 feet tall. The tallest among them would still be shorter than Nara, and Kemov looked like a siege tower by comparison. Any attempt to mimic their clothing would not disguise us. It would turn us into a grotesque performance of them. So civilian clothing it was. Plain, durable, nondescript, no rank insignia, no coalition seal, no ship patches, no service colors, no body armor visible, no helmets unless the environment forced the issue. Each member of the landing party would carry one weapon, a service pistol, secured inside clothing and not visible unless needed. Kemov hated that order, with the intensity of a Marine being told to walk into unknown terrain underarmed. He had not argued after I explained why. If the first thing they see is rifles, I had told him, then we have already failed. He had said only, then we do not fail slowly. That was Kemov's version of agreement. The second order was for Nara. Her standard medical field kit would not go down as a standard medical field kit. No white case, no medical markings. Definitely no caduceus, no rod of Asclepius, no snakes, no wings, no staff. The snake on a staff had begun as something older than modern medicine, tied in part to human religious memory from Exodus, and then reshaped through Greek and later medical tradition. Humanity had carried its symbols for thousands of years. That did not give us permission to recycle them into another world's sacred vocabulary. Aelari Prime already had enough gods waiting for us. Nara had transferred her field instruments, medications, scanners, sterile packs, and compact diagnostic tools into a plain brown satchel that looked, from enough distance and in the right light, like something a traveling medicine woman might carry. That was the limit. We would not add wings. We would not add snakes. We would not make human iconography part of Aelari religion because we were too careless to hide a logo. Communications were the next problem. Only 3 standard communicators would go down, mine, Nara's, and Kemov's. Each was to remain concealed, and was not to be taken out or used in view of the Aelari, unless the alternative was death or catastrophic mission failure. Everyone else would use the smaller in-ear passive units Bassie's team had configured for the landing party. The earpieces would do double duty. Passive comms. Translation. Bassie had loaded them with every local language sample Kestrel had gathered from the region around the Hall of the Moon's Heart, temple dialect, trader dialect, agricultural villages, ritual phrasing, formal address, taboo avoidance patterns, and enough uncertainty flags to make the system honest about what it did not know. A universal translator was not magic. It was a very sophisticated way of misunderstanding people more safely. I set the football down and rubbed both hands over my face. The landing party list remained unchanged. Me, Nara Marsh, under direct medical monitoring. Kemov Chen, Russo Bishop would fly Shuttle 1 down, put us where we needed to be, and return to Singapore unless circumstances forced extraction standby. Hernandez would hold the ship in silent overwatch. Varos would finish the holding cell in Deck 4's double-height cargo bay. That last order had felt better to give than it should have. I did not want revenge. I wanted Thrihiel contained. There was a difference. On Eden, I had protected Joseph and still watched Thrihiel walk away with the Trappist artifact. That was not failure, not exactly. The after-action language called it a costly coalition victory, and as much as I hated staff phrases, that one had the virtue of being true. But the image remained. Thrihiel leaving. Joseph alive, but shaken into a life he had never asked for. The fang burning in Eden's fields. I picked up the football again. The defense showed pressure. The coverage was disguised. And somewhere beneath a temple on a world that still believed the universe ended at the sky, the ball was about to be snapped. My stomach growled. That was unexpectedly helpful. There are few things more effective against spiraling command philosophy than the reminder that the human body still expects dinner. I stood, shut down the display, and left the ready room. The mess was warmer than I expected. Not temperature. Atmosphere. Gibby had claimed the galley like a man fortifying a position. Steam rose from covered trays. The smell was rich and clean: ginger, garlic, chicken broth, rice, sesame, something bright and green underneath it. Several crew members were already at the tables. Hernandez sat with a cup of tea and a datapad she was not reading. Bishop had one boot hooked around a chair leg, talking quietly with Bassie. Varro stood near the galley with the expression of a man observing food preparation as an engineering process. Kimov sat alone until Chen and Russo arrived and made solitude impossible. Nara looked up when I entered. She had changed into the civilian clothes selected for the landing: dark trousers, simple jacket, boots, the plain medical satchel resting on the chair beside her. Without the uniform and medical insignia, she looked less like Singapore's chief medical officer, and more like a woman trying very hard not to become a moon goddess by accident. Gibby saw me and pointed a serving spoon in my direction. "Captain, you're late." I was not aware this had a start time. Food always has a start time. People just pretend it doesn't. What are we having? Gibby lifted the lid from the main tray with the solemn pride of a man revealing a minor miracle. Singaporean Hainanese chicken and rice. Figured if the ship is named Singapore, I should honor the name properly before y'all go do whatever deeply inadvisable thing the mission plan says you're doing tomorrow. That plan is classified. Captain, this ship has 45 people on it. The coffee machine knows the plan. Bishop raised her hand from the table. The coffee machine told me to lodge an objection. Denied, I said. Gibby served me a plate. Poached chicken sliced cleanly, fragrant rice glossy with broth and fat, cucumber, sauces arranged with almost ceremonial care. Ginger scallion, chili, dark soy, a bowl of clear broth on the side. Sit, he said. That sounded like an order. It was hospitality. Those are close cousins on this ship. I sat beside Nara. Gibby brought plates to the rest of the landing party first, then to Hernandez and Bishop, then anyone else who had drifted in. He did not say why. He did not need to. This was not a last meal. No one would have tolerated that phrasing. But it was a before meal, and everyone in the room understood the difference. I took the first bite. The rice was the thing. The chicken was excellent, tender and clean, but the rice carried the whole dish. Broth, fat, ginger, garlic. The quiet proof that simple food is rarely simple when done properly. I looked up at Gibby. That's good. He nodded gravely. I know. Nara tried hers and closed her eyes for half a second. Very good. Doctor approved, Gibby said. Highest authority aboard. I thought I was highest authority aboard, I said. Operationally, yes. Culinarily, no, Hernandez said. That distinction seems accurate. Thank you, Commander. The helmswoman approves, Bishop said. Hernandez gave her a look. Bishop smiled into her rice. Varos sampled the broth with careful attention. This is highly efficient food. Gibby stared at him. Bishop leaned over. You may want to clarify that you meant that as praise. I did. Say more. Varos considered. The rice carries flavor, fat, and energy density. The chicken provides protein without excessive textural conflict. The broth restores heat and salts. The sauces permit individual adjustment without destabilizing the base structure. Gibby looked at him for a long moment. That, he said, is the strangest compliment I have ever received, and I accept it. Russo took a bite and pointed his fork at Varos. Man just reviewed dinner like it was a shuttle inspection. Chen said. He liked it. I got that part. Kemov ate silently. After several bites, he looked at Gibby and nodded once. Gibby placed one hand over his heart. From Lieutenant Kemov? That is a standing ovation. The table laughed. For a while, we let the meal do what meals do when civilization is working properly. We talked about the food, about whether Hainanese chicken rice counted as comfort food or engineering, about Bishop's claim that any dish built around sauces was inherently pilot-friendly because it allowed last-second course correction, about Bassie's objection that the metaphor failed because the rice had already committed to the plate. No one mentioned gods, not at first. Then Gibby came around with extra broth and paused beside me. He looked at my civilian jacket hanging over the back of the chair, at Nara's plain satchel, at Kemov's carefully neutral clothes, at the room pretending tomorrow was only another operation. Even gods need to eat, he said. The table went still, not completely. Forks paused, eyes lifted. Nara's hand tightened around her cup. Gibby's expression did not change. There was no mockery in it, no theatricality, just the ship's cook saying the thing everyone else had stepped around. We are not gods, Nara said. I know that, Doc. His voice was gentle. But if they don't, then you're going to need to remember something. Gods in stories get offerings. Captains and doctors get hungry. Don't let what they call you make you forget what you are. No one spoke for a moment. Then Kemov said, Good advice. Gibby nodded as if this had been the expected tactical conclusion. I looked around the mess, Hernandez already carrying the weight of command in my absence. Bishop, who would fly us down and hate leaving us there. Varos, preparing to build a holding cell for a Kehlar out of spare cargo bay materials and Lennian disapproval. Bassi, whose scholarship had turned a mythological trap visible before it closed. Kemov, Chen, Russo. Nara beside me. Gibby at the center of the room, feeding everyone because that was how he fought fear. A small ship, a smaller meal, a civilization below us waiting to misunderstand the sky. I lifted my glass. Not high, not a toast exactly. Tomorrow we do the job, I said. Tonight we eat. That was enough. The crew ate together. And for one more hour before doctrine and myth and Thrihiel and the Hall of the Moon's heart pulled us into whatever came next, Singapore felt less like a warship hiding in the night of an alien world, and more like a table with enough chairs for everyone who needed one. 19. Houston Movement. Joseph had started to recognize the streets between Admiral Archuleta's apartment tower and the Academy High School. That surprised him. Houston was still too large to understand all at once. It unfolded in layers his mind had not yet learned to hold. Elevated transit lines, broad avenues, service roads, residential towers, training fields, old campus buildings preserved behind newer glass, and Navy security checkpoints that seemed to appear where the city decided to become military without warning. But the morning route had become familiar through repetition. Out of the residential complex, past the low administration building with the flags, right at the Memorial Plaza where the old spaceflight names were carved into black stone, 3 blocks along the Academy perimeter road, then through the school gate used by dependents of Navy and Marine personnel stationed at headquarters or assigned to the Academy. Joseph had learned that the school was officially called the Houston Coalition Academy Preparatory Campus. Everyone else called it Academy High. It was free for dependents of personnel assigned to the headquarters complex, which Steve had described as one of the better perks of having the Navy take over your life. Joseph was not sure whether he counted as a dependent, a ward, a protected witness, a research participant, or something else entirely. The school had accepted him without using any of those words. He attended in the mornings. In the afternoons, he worked with Fevai at the cipher lab, and received academic credit for supervised research, which sounded more formal than what it felt like. What it felt like was that he spent half the day sitting in classrooms full of Navy and Marine children who knew how to move every 2 or 3 years without acting as if the ground had disappeared beneath them, and half the day helping a children's scientist look at a map built by dead hands older than history. Both halves were difficult. The classroom half was harder in smaller ways. This morning he sat in the back seat of the security vehicle with his satchel beside him and the safety harness secured across his chest. Steve had insisted on the harness the first day. Then the Marine driver had insisted every day after that without needing to be told. The vehicle was civilian in outward appearance, dark gray, unmarked, low profile, clean enough to belong to a government employee, and plain enough not to invite attention. Its windows were privacy-treated, but not dark enough to look armored unless someone knew what to look for. The Marine driving it wore plain clothes. So did the second Marine in the front passenger seat. They looked, to anyone watching casually, like 2 serious men driving a boy to school. Joseph had learned that this was the point. Security that looked like security told people where to look. The driver's name was Staff Sergeant Vega. He had close-cropped hair, brown skin, and a habit of checking mirrors without seeming to move his head. The passenger was Corporal Ames, younger, pale, quieter, with hands that rested near his lap in a way Joseph understood only after Steve explained that his weapon was concealed there. Joseph did not find their presence comforting exactly. He found it steadying. There was a difference. The vehicle rolled through the morning traffic at the edge of the headquarters district. Houston sunlight flashed across glass towers. Students in uniform and civilian clothes crossed at a controlled intersection ahead, some with backpacks slung over one shoulder, some walking in groups, some laughing too loudly because morning required defiance. A Navy transport passed in the opposite lane. Somewhere overhead, an aircraft descended toward the spaceport. Joseph looked out the window and thought about the letter in his desk drawer. He had read it again before leaving. Only once. He had not meant to, but his hand had gone to the drawer after he dressed. Abraham's handwriting had been there, waiting with the same quiet weight it had carried the night Senator Whitford delivered it. Joseph had unfolded the paper carefully, read the first line, and stopped for longer than necessary. My son Joseph. He had folded it again after that and placed it back on top of the notebook. He had not cried. He had also not prayed. That fact sat with him now as the vehicle turned onto the Academy Perimeter Road. On Eden, mornings had shape, chores, breakfast, scripture sometimes, depending on the day. Orders that did not feel like orders because they were older than any one person giving them. Houston mornings were efficient. The apartment door locked itself. The elevator recognized Steve's authorization. The Marines had the vehicle waiting. The route had timing. The school had a schedule. Joseph was beginning to understand that agency did not always feel like freedom at first. Sometimes it felt like being asked where you wanted to go, and realizing the answer mattered. At some point he wanted to go to Lineania. He had said it aloud to Steve. The words still surprised him when he remembered them. They had not been planned. They had arrived while eating brisket and macaroni and cheese, carried by smoke and history, and the knowledge that a part of his blood belonged to a people he had never met properly. Steve had taken him seriously. That mattered, too. The vehicle passed the Memorial Plaza, 3 blocks from the residential tower. Vega's hand shifted on the wheel. Nothing dramatic, no sudden movement, no shouted warning, just a small change in posture, like a man hearing a sound before anyone else did. Ames noticed it at once. What? He asked. Vega's eyes moved to the side mirror. Contact detected. Joseph's hands tightened against the straps of his harness. Ames looked forward, then right, then down at a compact display Joseph could not see from the back seat. Where? 11 o'clock, construction alcove, 2 figures, maybe 3. Vega's voice remained flat. Another at the service entrance ahead. The vehicle did not slow. That frightened Joseph more than if it had. He looked through the windshield. The street ahead looked ordinary because streets always looked ordinary until they did not. Morning light. A delivery cart near the curb. 2 pedestrians under an awning. A maintenance barrier around a section of sidewalk. A person in work clothes standing near the service entrance to a low building with one hand inside his jacket. Then Joseph saw the second figure. Then the third. The world rearranged itself around him. The maintenance barrier became cover. The delivery cart became obstruction. The person by the service entrance became a position. The pedestrians were not walking, they were waiting. Ames said one word Joseph did not understand. It might have been a code. Vega's right hand moved. The vehicle dropped into reverse so hard Joseph's harness locked across his chest. Tires screamed. Not the full engine. Something quieter and sharper. Backup power, Joseph realized dimly. Steve had explained once that security vehicles could move on separate systems if the primary drive was disabled. Joseph had listened at the time because listening was polite. Now the knowledge came back with terrible clarity. The vehicle shot backward. A figure ahead moved too fast for a normal pedestrian. Something came up under his coat. Ames twisted in his seat, drew his concealed weapon, and fired twice through the windshield. The sound cracked inside the cabin, loud enough that Joseph flinched despite himself. The windshield did not break. It shimmered where the rounds passed through a firing membrane Joseph had not known existed. The figure ahead dropped behind the maintenance barrier. Vega did not look back as he reversed. The vehicle's rear display must have shown him what Joseph could only see by turning his head. He turned. Behind them, 2 more figures stepped from the mouth of a side street. Additional positions. Ambush. The word felt too clean for what it meant. Vega's left thumb struck a recessed control on the wheel. "Emergency beacon fired," he said. "Coalition protectee under attack. Grid 3-7, Academy perimeter, moving." The vehicle's console gave one sharp tone. Somewhere, Joseph hoped, the signal had gone to Steve, to Navy security, to Marines with rifles and armor and the authority to make this stop. But not yet. Not here. The vehicle slewed backward across the lane, then snapped into a turn that threw Joseph sideways against the harness. His satchel slid off the seat and hit the floor. Papers inside shifted. His tablet thumped against the side. Ames fired again. Something struck the vehicle from the rear quarter with a sound like a hammer hitting a bell. Joseph's breath caught. The cabin lights flickered. "Armor holding," Ames said. "For now," Vega answered. He threw the vehicle into a narrow service alley Joseph had never noticed before. The entrance barely looked wide enough for a person on a bicycle. Vega took it anyway. The side mirrors retracted automatically. The vehicle scraped one wall, sparks snapping past Joseph's window. He did not scream. He was afraid. The fear was complete and physical, a cold rushing through his arms and legs, a tightness in his chest, a strange clarity in his eyes. But he did not scream. Eden boys were trained for crises differently than urban children. Not for this, exactly. No one on Eden had trained him for armed figures in a Houston street trying to take him from a security vehicle. But storms came. Animals panicked. Tools failed. Children got hurt far from the house. Fire moved faster than people thought. The first rule had always been the same. Do not make the emergency larger by becoming another emergency. So Joseph held himself still. He kept his hands on the harness. He breathed because fainting would not help. The alley blurred past. Service doors, utility boxes, a strip of sky overhead too narrow to belong to morning. The vehicle ran nearly silent now except for tires and the strain of backup systems. Ames turned partly toward the back seat. "Joseph, you hit?" Joseph had to force the answer out. "No. You stay down. I am restrained." "Good. Stay more restrained." That might have been humor. Joseph could not tell. The alley opened toward another street. Vega checked the display. 2 blocks to secondary gate if we clear. A figure stepped into the road ahead. The vehicle's tires shrieked as Vega braked and turned at the same time. Joseph saw the figure through the windshield, as if the world had narrowed itself to one impossible point. Tall, broad, light armor under a loose outer cloak, long muzzle, sharp ears, dense shoulders. Kehlar. The mercenary stood in the road ahead of them with a compact weapon rising in both hands. The vehicle screeched around the corner, and Joseph's last clear thought before the world became motion and sound again was that Abraham's letter was still folded in his desk drawer, and Captain Hansen was too far away to help. 20 down. Before I boarded the shuttle, I gave Hernandez the orders in the Situation Room because the bridge was too public for how much I disliked them. Aelari Prime turned beneath us in the main display, half night and half cloud-bright day. The moon hung beyond it, pale and tidally locked, one face forever watching the world below while the far side hid Thrihiel's second-hand Lenian cargo handler in the dark. Singapore held her low-profile orbit inside the planet's night shadow, quiet enough that even our own system seemed to be breathing carefully. Hernandez stood across from me with a datapad in one hand and her command face on. That was the face I needed. "If you see launch activity from the surface," I said, "you track it. You do not move Singapore unless that launch threatens the ship, Kestrel, or the landing party." "Aye, Captain." "If Thrihiel's ship moves from the far side of the moon, then you move. Not before." Her eyes flicked once to the display. "Understood." "If you and Bishop both believe you have the element of surprise, you may attempt a boarding action." Hernandez's expression did not change, but the room felt a degree colder. "And if we cannot board?" "Disable it," I said. "Destroy it only as a last resort." The words did what orders do when they become real. They left my mouth and became someone else's burden. Hernandez nodded once. I continued because stopping would have made it harder to finish. "I want Thrihiel alive if possible. I want that ship intact if possible. But I do not want him leaving this system the way he left Eden." "No, sir." There was no need to say Joseph's name. He was in the room anyway. Bishop stood near the aft hatch, flight jacket zipped, civilian clothes underneath, her pilot's focus already settling over her like a second skin. She had been quiet during the exchange. That was rare enough that I noticed. "You comfortable with this?" I asked her. "With letting you go down there while I stay with the shuttle?" she said. "No, with flying the approach?" "Yes." "That was the part I meant." "I know." Hernandez looked at her. "If the cargo handler moves, I will need your read quickly." "You'll have it," Bishop said. "If he so much as twitches behind that moon, we'll know whether it's a stretch, a yawn, or a sprint." Good. That was the end of the briefing. No speech, no ritual, no stirring line for the ship's history file. I looked at Hernandez one more time. "You have the ship." "I have the ship." That was enough. Shuttle 1 waited in Deck 4's double-height bay with its port hatch open, and its interior lights dimmed. The cargo bay had been stripped down to mission posture. Shuttle 2 sat secured in its berth opposite us, configured for extraction and medical overflow. Farther aft, Varos's team had finished the temporary holding cell, reinforced panels, Independent environmental monitor. No exposed controls. No sharp edges that had not been made blunt by deliberate human anxiety. It looked uncomfortable, humane, and difficult to escape. Good enough. Our shuttle was smaller than the situation deserved. One pilot's seat forward. Glass cockpit. Physical joystick and throttle quadrant. A stowable QWERTY keyboard folded under the console because humanity had crossed interstellar space and still liked keys where fingers could find them. Behind Bishop's seat were 8 bucket seats in 2 compact rows, restraints webbed across them, with storage in the aft section and the propulsion package beyond the rear bulkhead. It was not glamorous. It was a pod with ambition. Kemov boarded first, because Kemov believed unsecured interiors were a personal insult. Chen and Russo followed in plain civilian clothing that made both of them look like off-duty dock workers who had accidentally become dangerous. Their service pistols were concealed. No rifles, no armor visible, no helmets. None of them liked it. All of them obeyed. Marsh came next, moving more slowly than she wanted and pretending that Nara was not matching her pace for medical reasons. She wore loose travel clothes, the kind of practical civilian outfit a field researcher might choose if she were pretending not to be one. Her face still carried too much pallor, but her eyes were clear. Nara boarded behind her with a plain medical satchel slung across one shoulder. No medical insignia, no white field case, no snake on a staff, no wings, no human religious or historical symbol waiting to become part of someone else's theology. I boarded last. Bishop was already in the pilot's seat, hands moving through pre-flight checks with a kind of competence that made complicated things look rude for having bothered her. She did not look back when I strapped into the seat directly behind her. "You sure about the meteor profile?" she asked. "I am." "You understand that making a shuttle look like a meteor while also not actually becoming a meteor involves several layers of professional insult." "Can you do it?" She glanced back then. "Of course I can do it. I'm objecting artistically." Objection noted, and ignored, and ignored. She smiled and turned forward. The rear hatch sealed. The shuttle system shifted from bay power to internal. The deck under us vibrated as the shuttle bay began cycling to vacuum. Singapore did not use force fields. The bay cleared. Air pumped into reservoirs. The underside hatch would open only once the compartment was hard vacuum, and then Bishop would drop us into the dark. The intercom clicked. Hernandez's voice came through, controlled and steady. "Shuttle 1, Singapore. Base cycle complete. You are cleared for launch." Bishop's right hand settled on the throttle. "Shuttle 1 copies. Launching." The bay released us. For half a second the shuttle fell. Then Bishop caught us with the aft thrusters and turned the fall into flight. Aelari Prime filled the forward glass in silence. We dropped from Singapore's night side orbit and curved toward the Terminator, running cold as long as possible. The predetermined landing zone lay on the day side, 15 kilometers from the position Bassi, Marsh, and Kestrel's files had identified as the most likely site of Thrihiel's surface landing. Close enough to matter. Far enough, in theory, not to step directly onto his footprints. The phrase "in theory" was doing a lot of work. "Profile shift in 20 seconds, Bishop said. Meteor mask begins at upper atmosphere." Kemov sat across from me, one hand resting loose near his concealed pistol. Chen had his eyes closed, not sleeping, just quieting himself. Russo looked through the side port and muttered something under his breath. "What was that?" Kemov asked. "Prayer, Lieutenant." Kemov nodded once. "Continue." Nara sat beside Marsh, one hand near the monitor clipped under Marsh's sleeve. Marsh stared forward like a woman trying to memorize the shape of consequences. "Entering atmosphere," Bishop said. The shuttle began to shake. At first it was a tremor through the frame, then a hard vibration that climbed through the seats and into my bones. Light flared beyond the cockpit glass as the shuttle's outer skin caught the designed burn. Bishop had calculated the angle to mimic a small atmospheric object breaking up across the sky, bright enough to be explainable if seen, controlled enough not to kill us. The difference between meteor and wreckage was Bishop's hands. "Thermal skin holding," she said. "Meteor mass good. We are officially a harmless natural phenomenon." The shuttle bucked hard enough that Russo's restraint locked. "Harmless my ass," he said. "Quiet," Kemov said. "Yes, Lieutenant." Cloud swallowed us. The forward glass turned gray-white, then greenish, then black with water streaks as we punched through layers of dense tropical atmosphere. The shuttle lurched left. Bishop corrected. It dropped. She caught it. The joystick moved in sharp, precise increments under her hand, while her other hand worked the throttle with the small adjustments of someone playing an instrument in a room that kept tilting. "Convection is worse than projected," she said. "How much worse?" I asked. "Enough that Bassie owes me coffee." The shuttle slammed upward, then rolled right. Marsh made a small sound and grabbed the restraint. Nara looked at her monitor. "Marsh?" "I'm fine." "You are nauseated. That is a form of fine." "It is not," Bishop said. "Limited visibility. Sensors painting ground intermittently. Jungle canopy is thick, looking for the clearing." The descent became a fight. Not the dramatic kind from training films where alarms wailed and people shouted over sparks. This was worse because it was quieter. Bishop flew through water vapor, heat, rising jungle air, and sensor returns that appeared and vanished in half-formed pieces. The shuttle did not want to be where she was putting it. Bishop kept putting it there anyway. "Ground return," she said. "I have the clearing." The forward display resolved into shapes, canopy, slope, watercourse, open ground. Range 2 kilometers, 1.5, sink rate high. "Bishop," I said, "I know." The clearing rushed up through green. Bishop pulled the nose high, bled speed, killed the last visible burn, and dropped us between walls of vegetation. The touchdown was hard, not catastrophic, not elegant. Hard. The landing struts hit uneven ground. The shuttle bounced once, slammed down again, and settled with a groan that sounded personal. For 1 second no one moved. Then Bishop exhaled. Intact. Varos would have disagreed with the phrasing, but Varos was not aboard. Kemov released his harness. "Chen Russo." The Marines moved. The port hatch opened onto daylight. Heat flooded the cabin. Chen went out first, low and fast, pistol still concealed but hand ready. Russo followed to the opposite angle. Kemov dropped behind them, scanned the tree line, and made 2 quick hand signals. "Clear immediate," he said. I unstrapped and stepped out. The air hit me like a wet blanket someone had stored in a greenhouse. Hot, humid, alive, thick with vegetation smells I could not separate quickly enough. Damp soil, crushed leaves, flowers, rot, resin, water, animal musk, and something sharp that reminded me of citrus without being citrus. The jungle rose around the clearing in layered green walls. Vines hung from branches. Broad leaves shifted in the wind. Insects, or their nearest Aelari equivalents, buzzed in overlapping pulses from everywhere at once. Aelari Prime did not sound like Earth. It sounded close enough to make the differences unsettling. Nara stepped down beside me, medical satchel across her shoulder, face already flushed from the heat. She took 1 breath and gave me a look. "I hate humidity," she said. "I'll note that in the mission log." "Do not." Marsh emerged last, one hand braced briefly against the hatch. Nara was beside her instantly. "I can walk," Marsh said. "I know," Nara replied. I am making sure you continue to. Behind us, the aft storage compartment held the gear we had intended to unload. Nondescript shelter rolls, water purification units, sealed food, compact field tools, additional medical supplies, sensor packs disguised as plain cargo, and enough camp equipment to keep 6 humans functional without looking too much like 6 humans had arrived from orbit. We had rehearsed unloading it in under 4 minutes. We got 32 seconds. Bishop's head snapped toward her sensor display. Movement! Kemov heard the tone and turned. Where? South, multiple contacts, small body mass, moving through vegetation toward clearing. Aelari? I asked. Likely, not Kehlar, not human, not mechanical. How many? 8, maybe 12, more behind, closing fast. There was a moment when all the planning tried to exist at once. Unload gear, hide shuttle, avoid local contact, protect landing party, preserve non-interference. No visible technology. No shuttle seen by Bronze Age locals. The shuttle could not be here when they arrived. Bishop, I said. Lift, now. She looked back at me through the open hatch. The objection was in her face before Rank killed it. We still have gear aboard. I know. Lift now. We can get? No. Go. For half a second her jaw tightened. Then she nodded. Aye, Captain. Nara looked at the gear still in the shuttle. She knew what we were losing. Extra medical supplies, shelter, water, sensor support, the tools that would have made a controlled landing operation feel slightly less like being dropped into someone else's myth with a satchel and a sidearm. Kemov moved to my left. Chen and Russo fell back around us, forming a loose screen without looking like a formation, which was impossible but admirable. Bishop sealed the hatch. The shuttle's engines began to whine. Back! Kemov ordered. We moved to the edge of the clearing, under the first line of trees. Marsh stumbled once. Nara caught her and kept her upright. Hot wind rolled across the open ground as the shuttle lifted. Bishop kept the ascent low for the first few meters, then threw the nose up and punched through a gap in the canopy with brutal precision. Leaves tore loose in the downwash. Dust and pollen spun into the air. The shuttle climbed hard, turning as it rose, its hull vanishing into low cloud before the sound had fully left the clearing. Then it was gone. No camp gear, no extra supplies, no shuttle, no visible proof from the sky except disturbed vegetation and 6 very tall strangers standing where no strangers should be. I touched the concealed communicator through my jacket but did not take it out. We had one reasonable communication window with Singapore each night. 10 minutes at most before the orbital track carried her beyond our line of sight. Until then, we had the in-ear passive units, the translators loaded with Bassie's local dialects, the 3 hidden communicators, Nara's medicine bag, civilian clothes, concealed pistols, and whatever judgment we had managed to bring with us. It did not feel like much. The jungle to the south rustled. Voices came through the trees. High, quick, layered with consonants the translator in my ear caught, sorted, and hesitated over. Aelari. Local population. Not Thrihiel's forces. Kemov's hand hovered near his concealed weapon but did not draw it. Chen and Russo held position. Nara stood beside me with Marsh just behind her, both of them watching the vegetation. I looked once at the cloud layer where Bishop had vanished. Then I turned toward the approaching voices. The first Aelari shape moved behind the leaves. Small, upright, armed with a spear tipped in bronze or something very like it. I took one slow breath of hot, living air. The shuttle was gone. The locals were coming, and the story we had tried to avoid was about to see us first. This has been part 2 of the Verdant Paradox Book 2 in R.M. Stratton's military sci-fi series Concord Horizon. If you like the audiobook, the ebook is available on Amazon at the link in the description.